الو
Hello, Hussein. Marhaba.
مرحبا Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Very good, very good. Thanks for joining. Thank you very much.
No problem. I do
Yeah.
have video connection, but my internet has been horrible this week, so it goes in and out. So
Yeah,
I can.
yeah. I
When-
can imagine. I can imagine. You know, I'm usually working from home, but for this type of meeting, I have to come to the office to avoid any internet issues.
Makes sense.
Yes. Yes. Hello, Brett. Good morning, Brett. I don't know if Brett.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله
أسعد
وبركاته.
الله مساكم بكل خير.
ربنا يخليك يا دكتور علي، ازي حضرتك؟
كيف حالكم؟ إن شاء الله بخير. كيف خوي حسين؟ إن شاء الله بخير.
والله في نعمة يا دكتور، الحمد لله رب العالمين، الحمد لله. ازاي
كيف
صحة
الأمور؟
حضرتك؟
والله بخير إن شاء الله. كيف الزملاء كلهم؟ إن شاء الله بخير.
كلهم بخير بفضل الله،
اللهم
بفضل الله
لك
كلنا
الحمد.
تمام، الحمد لله الحمد لله.
ما أدري أكتمل البلد ليست ولا لسه؟
والله ممكن ننتظر مثلا 5 minutes.
ممكن.
ايه
أوكي.
رأي حضرتك، بحيث ان احنا ندي فرصة لبعض الزملاء ان هم يخشوا؟ يعني انا شايف ان في
ممتاز ممتاز.
الاعداد بتزيد، الاعداد في تزايد يعني.
بإذن الله. أنا عندي مشكلة في الاتصال، فإن شاء الله تكون انحلت شوي إن شاء الله بإذن
يا
الله.
رب، ان شاء الله ان شاء الله. كتر خيرك كتر خيرك يا دكتور. Brian, I believe we're still missing Anthony, right?
That's correct. I just texted Brett as well, just to make sure we can get his voice
Yes.
working. He's
Yeah,
on the line.
I can hear you, Hussein. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well, Brett. Very well. Thanks for
Very
joining,
good.
Brett.
Good morning. And I'll turn on my video once we start the presentations too, so we don't confuse folks.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks a lot, Brett.
Yes.
I believe we are missing from the panelist Anthony and Hussein El Sheikh, but I see Hussein already in the participant lists, so I will try to manage this as well.
I just texted Tony. So
hello everyone.
Hello, Dr. Hussein. How are you, my friend?
How are you, Dr. Hassan? Thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. It's fixed right now. The issue has been solved, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. You can hear me well, right?
Yeah, very well, very well. Thank you.
Thank you. That's perfect.
Anthony, good morning.
He still didn't open his mic.
Yes, maybe. Good morning, Anthony. Good morning.
Hello, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having us.
اعتقد في بعض الاسئله هنا بالنسبه للكاميرا. اعتقد ان الكاميرا والاوديو فقط هيبقوا شغالين بالنسبه للباناليست. فطبعا اي حد من البارتيسيبانت مش هيقدر ان هو يشير الكاميرا او الاوديو الا لو الاورجنايزر جيف بيرميشن. فمش عارف يا دكتور عمر، انا كده رديت على اجابه حضرتك على سؤال حضرتك. Thank you very much. ولكن لو في اي استفسار او اي حاجه لاي زميل، اعتقد احنا عندنا في اوبشن في الكويشن اند انسر او في الشات بوكس، ممكن نبدا ان احنا نحط اي استفسار او اي سؤال. I'm just talking about some housekeeping information. We have the chat box and the question and answer at the bottom of the Zoom. In case you have any question, anytime, just please put your question in the question and answer box, or even in the chat box, and we will be following, and we will answer each question and handle each question separately. Okay. So Anthony, Brett, and Brian, I just had communication with Dr. Ali from the Ministry of Environment, Water, and Agriculture, and we agreed that we will start, let's say, after 5 minutes, just to give some time for other participants to join. So thanks
Sounds
for your
good.
understanding. Thanks for your understanding.
ابتدي دكتور حسين.
اتفضل دكتور علي، اتفضل حضرتك.
اكتمل البانيليست
البانيلست كلهم مكتملين، يعني
ممتاز.
الليسته كامله ان شاء الله. اتفضل سعادتك دكتور علي.
أول شيء السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، وأسعد الله مساءكم بكل خير. أرحب فيكم دكتور حسين، وأيضا جميع الضيوف في البانل ليست واللي شاركونا هذه الفعالية ورشة العمل هذه. يعني وإحنا نهدف من إقامة هذه الفعالية إلى بناء شراكة فعالة مع القطاع الخاص بهدف نشر الوعي وأيضا الممارسات السليمة للإنتاج الحيواني في المملكة العربية السعودية. طبعا كما يعلم الجميع أن الوراثة أو الانتخاب الوراثي بشكل عام هو جزء لا يتجزأ من العملية الإنتاجية السليمة في مشاريع الألبان أو مشاريع الماشية بشكل عام. وكلما كان التحسين الوراثي ذو كفاءة عالية وذو جودة عالية، كلما انعكس ذلك على إنتاج وإنتاجية هذا القطاع. لدينا في المملكة العربية السعودية العديد من القطاعات يعني اللي المتقدمة في ذات المجال، ولكن أعتقد هناك فرص كبيرة للتحسين ويعني نشر الوعي والمفاهيم الحديثة وآخر ما توصلت له التقنية في مجال الانتخاب الوراثي والتحسين الوراثي. نحن في المملكة العربية السعودية نتبنى الخطة الوطنية لتحسين قطاع الماشية، وهذه وفق رؤية 2030، وهذه الخطة ترتكز أساساً على التحسين الوراثي للسلالات المحلية في المملكة العربية السعودية، وكذلك يعني تحسينها والاستفادة من المميزات الموجودة في الحيوانات هذه، ويعني تأقلمها مع المناخ والبيئة الجيدة، ونقل الخبرات من الدول المتقدمة إلى المملكة للتحسين الوراثي لتلك الماشية. لدينا عدد كبير من الثروة الحيوانية في المملكة العربية السعودية يقدر ب 24 مليون، ولكن يعني الإنتاجية منخفضة يعني مقارنة بهذا العدد الكبير، مقارنة بدول أخرى يعني قد يكون فيها العدد أقل من هذا بكثير ولكن الإنتاجية أعلى. خطتنا في المملكة العربية السعودية أن يعني ننشر مفاهيم الحديثة، ننشر السلالات الجديدة، أيضا نتوسع في مراكز التحسين الوراثي ومراكز البحث المتعلقة بذات المجال، وأيضا بناء الشراكات الفعالة مع القطاع الخاص سواء في مجال الأبحاث العلمية أو في مجال نشر الوعي. هنا طبعا لا يفوتني أني أشكر المكتب العلمي شركة زويتس وأيضا المكاتب الممثلة لها بالمملكة السعودية على يعني مبادرتهم باستضافة هذه الفعالية، وأيضا هذه الكوكبة والنخبة من الخبراء العالميين في ذات المجال. فأحب أشكركم دكتور حسين على هذه الفعالية، ويعني نتمنى لكم النجاح في هذه الفعالية، وأنا راح إن شاء الله بإذن الله أكون متابع معكم بإذن الله. يعني المايك معك دكتور حسين.
شكرا دكتور علي. يعني السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته. في البدايه بحب اتقدم بالشكر للزملاء طبعا في وزاره البيئه والمياه والزراعه، ممثله في الدكتور علي الدويرجي طبعا مدير عام اداره الصحه والرقابه البيطريه، على ان هم اتاحوا لنا هذه الفرصه العظيمه ان احنا نكون متواجدين معاكم النهارده في هذا اللقاء العلمي، يعني الذي اتمناه مثمرا باذن الله. طبعا حديثنا النهارده هيكون عن الانتخاب الوراثي لتحسين انتاجيه الماشيه، Genomic Selection for Improving Livestock Production. طبعا زي ما دكتور علي تفضل ويعني افتتح الميتنج ده، كان الجزء الاول في الميتنج. كنت بحب بشكل سريع ان انا اعرض على حضراتكم الاجنده بتاعه الميتنج النهارده. ف طبعا الجزء الاول هيكون معانا الدكتور او مستر بريت، هيتكلم على الرول بتاع الجينومكس اللي بتلعبه في الايفولفنج بتاع الديري اندستري. بريت هو طبعا السينيور مانجر في الجلوبال اند ماركتنج اند سيلز اوبريشنز في زويتس جينيتكس. وطبعا دي هتكون محاضره صغيره لمده 15 دقيقه، هيتبعها طبعا 5 دقائق في ملخص عربي. هيكون معانا في زميلنا العزيز دكتور حسين الشيخ. دكتور حسين هو طبعا البرودكت مانجر في الرومينانت والكومبانيون انيمال بزنس في زويتس في منطقه الشرق الاوسط. المحاضره الثانيه هيكون معانا الدكتور انتوني، هيتكلم على البيتر اوتكمز ثرو جينومكس تيستنج. ودكتور انتوني ماكنيل طبعا هو بي اتش دي، he is the principal scientist and the global in the global genetics technical service. ودي برضه هتكون محاضره لمده 45 دقيقه، هيتبعها الملخص العربي للمحاضره برضه مع زميلنا العزيز الدكتور حسين. بعد كده في النهايه هيبقى في محاضره ثانيه لمده 15 دقيقه، هيبقى معانا فيها برضه مستر بريستول، هيتكلم فيها على ايه هي الاشياء اللي we have to consider when optimizing a genomic testing program. وبرضه هيكون يليها ملخص عربي لمده 5 دقائق برضه، وبعد كده هيكون عندنا نص ساعه بحيث ان احنا نبدا نناقش مع بعض الاسئله والاستفسارات بتاعت حضراتكم. هتبقى open و free discussions، يعني ان شاء الله تكون حاجه مميزه وتكون فيها اضافه لكل الحضور باذن الله. وطبعا في النهايه هيكون معانا الدكتور علي ان شاء الله يعمل الكلوزنج بتاع الميتنج ان شاء الله. طبعا تاني بشكر حضراتكم على وجودكم النهارده معانا، وبنرحب جدا بحضراتكم، وطبعا بنثمن وقتكم طبعا اللي حضراتكم اديتوه لنا عشان تكونوا موجودين معانا النهارده. So at the beginning I'd like to welcome Mr. Pratt, our senior manager in the global marketing and sales operations for Zoetis Diagnostics. Pratt, now the floor is yours. You can directly share your screen and start immediately.
Very good. Thank you and good evening to everyone. Let me attempt to share my screen here so that we can start the presentation.
Yes, please.
So you should be able to see now the title slide. Is that correct, Hussein?
Yes, correct. We see it very well.
Very good. Well, good evening, everyone. And as Hussein had mentioned, we are going to be talking about genomic selection and how that can improve performance in the industry and ultimately helping to drive towards the objectives of Vision 2030. So for the first part of this presentation, I'll be speaking on the roles genomics plays in the evolving dairy industry. And so in order to talk about that, let's start with the industry itself. And so as we know, based on a lot of information that came out between 2000 and 2010, really the world dairy market and really the world animal agriculture market was looking at the challenge of doubling its food production in 50 years. So by the year 2050, we knew that we needed to roughly double the amount of food in order to satisfy the demand and population growth across the world. We also knew that we had to do this with only about the same amount of land that we were using today and the same number of animals. So about 70% of that growth in food production needed to come from technology and how we can better improve our herds, better improve our flocks and across the animal agriculture segment to be able to achieve the growth that the world's population was driving. To look at that in a little bit more detail, This is another view of the exact same thing. When we look at that population growth represents approximately 9.8 billion people by 2050 that will be on the globe. If we think about that in the context of what that means, is that's about another India and China added to the world's population. To be able to drive the doubling of the food production, that means we'll need twice as much dairy, twice as much meat, both without adding many more cows or any cows at all. And additionally, we have to feed those animals. So we're going to have to produce 1.5 times as much grain to be able to feed the animals and also produce grain for the human population. So this is really when we think about the challenge and what genomics was aiming for initially. This is the productivity imperative we knew we had to address in order to meet the population's demand of the future. So as we think about that population growth, of course, we also have a constraint on natural resources. There's only so much arable land in the world. And we know that a lot of that is already taken up. And as the population grows, there may be less arable land. So we need to ensure that we're growing our production to be able to feed the world in an area of natural resource constraint. And also we need to make sure that that food is healthy and sustainable. There's a lot of social and regulatory pressures now that we need to ensure that as an industry we're addressing. And we also need to ensure that as we grow our production, we can continue to remain focused on those individual animals, providing precision care and management to those animals that ultimately will allow us to grow and succeed. So this is really the challenge that we have and the challenge that genetics really looks at addressing. So when we think about the farm's response to this across the world, and these are a couple statistics from the United States, they come from the 2017 Census of Agriculture from the US government. When we look at these two charts, we have over on this one here on the left, we can see that the size of US dairies is growing. So while the average size of dairies is still around 300, 400 cows, we can see that there's becoming a disproportionate number, not disproportionate, there's becoming more large dairies. And that's what this yellow bar here is going to show, is that as our dairies look to achieve the challenge, right, to meet that challenge, then we're seeing that they need to be larger to be able to provide that level of production, to be able to mitigate the resource constraints they're under, and do so in the face of social and regulatory challenges. This chart here on the right shows a very similar view. So the blue bar is the number of cows that are in dairies from 1 to 100 cows, and you can see that's decreasing over time. And then the pink bar here on the top shows the number of cows that are in herds larger than 1,000 cows. So I show this to demonstrate that the industry is evolving. We're rising to the challenge. And as we rise to that challenge, there's a few key things that we need to keep in mind. There are some very large costs on our dairies. As you all know, feed is a large cost, representing about 50% of the cost on the dairy, and this is across the world. So sometimes it's a bit larger, sometimes it's a bit smaller, but roughly feed accounts for 50% of the cost of production on a dairy farm. Additionally, cost of labor and replacement costs. So how much money it takes to raise a heifer from birth until she's a productive member of the herd. That's a large cost as well. And so as we think about those costs, those are really the areas that we can look to address as we look to grow production in the face of those resource constraints. And when we think about genomics and the role that genomics plays in these costs, genomics really touches on many of these different areas where we can control costs or we can optimize and become more efficient as we look to grow our production. Genomics really can help us in the facets you see here on the right: nutrition, production, reproduction, milk quality, and health. As you know, a lot of that drives the financial picture on the dairy. And you've noticed probably that I'm talking a lot about the finances of the dairy. And that's because in its core, genomics it provides the ability to make precise decisions that ultimately will affect the financials of the operation. So thinking about just one specific area of that pie chart we looked at, that replacement cost, it's something that oftentimes we don't think about. We think about feed, we think about labor, but sometimes we don't think about that replacement cost. It often takes an animal into their second lactation in order for them to pay back their heifer rearing or raising costs. This is massive. This means any of those animals that calve and then are called from the herd or sold from the herd during that first lactation, especially those first 21 days, are probably not making us money. And the ability to identify those animals early in life and be able to make decisions on to sell her early, sell her as a pregnant heifer, or how to mitigate that risk of her ultimately not being profitable for the herd is a very valuable tool. The numbers you see here are from the UK. It just demonstrates some of the costs of raising heifers. I think in Saudi Arabia, we're looking at somewhere between 7,500 to 11,000 riyals per head to be able to raise an animal. It's just one of those massive costs on the dairies that we need to think about, and another area that genomics can help. And let me talk a little bit more about that. So this curve here shows, it's just a profitability curve, and it looks at each number under this curve is an individual animal. And this is a real herd data, again, from the UK, so United Kingdom. And on the left-hand side is low profitability. You'll see negative profitability. I'll highlight that here for you. So these animals here are highly negative profitably. So these are animals we don't want in our herd because they're not going to make us money. Then you can see these animals over to the right of this line. They're going to be the animals that are more profitable. They live longer, have less disease, produce more milk, and ultimately will make the herd money. Again, this is real data from a real farm. You can see here that of the heifers that are not profitable, the number's not showing here, but 63% of those animals are going to be profitable, and 37% of these heifers on the farm today are not likely to make the farm money. And so knowing this information early on in life is what genomics brings to the table. Being able to identify those animals that are likely to be profitable or those animals that aren't likely to be profitable, the ones that help us to achieve our goals and the ones that won't help us achieve our goals. This is absolutely critical technology that we have now to be able to drive our herds forward. So when we think about that, I just showed on the individual animal profitability side. Now thinking about it at the herd level, this is a study done by Holstein USA, done last year, and they looked at herds that had low genetic merit along the x-axis. Here's the genetic merit. They used a total performance index, which is a genetic index that estimates the total performance of an animal. So you can see here the numbers in the range from 1,200 to 1,600 here along the bottom. These were the TPI values for herds, so the average for a herd in 2010. And then you can see here on the y-axis, you have the percent of those herds that are still in business as of 2018. So that's the data set that they looked at. You can see here, if a herd had an average genetic merit of below 1,300, then that herd was more likely to go out of business than to stay in business, okay? And so this is showing that the genetic merit of a herd is a direct correlation to the odds that that herd will stay in business or not stay in business, okay? So we know that by looking at the individual animals and being able to look at that curve I showed on the previous slide, but this is absolutely critical to knowing where we can be from a financial standpoint for the herd and if we're likely to stay in business or not. Of course, not all of these low genetic merit herds went out of business, and not all of the high genetic merit herds stayed in business, but it shows that there is a very good reason to look at the genetics in the herd. Now, it's not just about looking at the genetics, okay? So on this slide, we can show that we can make an impact in how we manage the genetics of the herd, and that's really where genomic testing comes in. So we have here a chart that looks from 2006 to 2016. You have 3 lines here. You have a red line that shows a slow improving herd. So this is one herd demonstrated over time. A green herd is showing a herd that is a good herd and uses genetic testing. And then you have the industry average here on the black line. So you can see that both of these herds have improved their genetic merit compared to the average. But one of the things that's really important is you notice over here this 1,300, and that is relating back to that previous slide of the farms under 1,300 in 2010 were very much less likely to be in business in 2018. And then you can see up here on the top limit is 2,500. So what this graph is showing us, and sorry, you can see here in 2009 is when genomic testing was introduced. So you can see an inflection point of when herds were better able to manage their genomic information. Of course, a lot of other things happened during this time as well. But we can see that when genomic testing was introduced, there's an inflection point of the ability of herds to be able to manage their herd in a way to optimize the genetic potential of their herd or improve it, okay? And so what we see is in 2006, these two herds had a difference in their genetic merit, again, using TPI of 250. In 2016, 10 years later, they had a difference of about 700, or about 3 times as much. So the herd that's using the information to grow the genetic merit of their herd is finding an absolute difference. And Dr. McNeil is going to speak here in a moment about what this actually means and how this correlates to profitability. Okay, so how these indexes can show us, economic indexes can show us the profitability of dairies. So now that we know that it's important, right, and we've talked about the importance of it and that we can manage it, how does this actually look in practice? So genomics is a resource management tool, and genomic testing is a resource management tool, okay? It allows dairy producers to make informed decisions about their animals with a high level of confidence early in life. We can make decisions of if we keep an animal or we're going to sell an animal, if that animal will be profitable or not profitable for our herd, and decide when we can best sell that animal if, for instance, we no longer want that animal as a part of the future of our herd. We can also make breeding decisions, mating decisions. There's a lot of decisions we can make from this information. These benefits of these decisions are additive and they grow over time, okay? Meaning that if you make a decision to keep an animal today that has superior genetic merit, she's going to pass that merit along to her offspring as well. And so her calves and her replacement calves that she has will ultimately be more valuable than another animal that may have taken her spot. Additionally, genomics can help with the economic and environmental sustainability of an operation. Depending on the indexes used and depending on the management decisions made, can make a significant positive impact as well. So thinking about some of the benefits, one of the benefits of being able to identify these animals is we can sell these excess or non-profitable heifers either earlier in life or as a pregnant heifer to increase our cash flow. We can reduce our costs associated with raising replacement heifers. We can raise those low merit animals differently or even sell them altogether and not raise them. And we can get premium sale prices for those calves. So because the benefits are additive, long-term, we can get a premium for those animals. And ultimately, we end up with a healthier, longer-lived, fertile, and productive herd. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. McNeil, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the biology of genomic testing, what it is, what it means, and then he's also going to talk about some of the results we can see and how those results really impact dairies. So with that, I will actually, I think we're going to pause for translation here, so I'll turn it back over to you, Hussein.
Thanks so much, Brett, for this nice introduction. So I would like to give the floor now to our colleague Hussein El Sheikh to give the Arabic translation, please. Hussein, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Hussein. You can hear me well, correct?
Yes, very well.
You can see my screen as well?
Yeah, very well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brett, for this introduction. It was really useful and very informative. But I will just now speak in Arabic, so that I will translate like minimum of what you said. اولا انا حابب اشكر حضراتكم، اهلا وسهلا بحضراتكم معانا مع زواتس، وطبعا وزاره البيئه والمياه معانا من السعوديه. اهلا وسهلا بحضراتكم. انا حسين الشيخ، مدير التسويق في قطاع المقترات والحيوانات الاليفه في شركه زواتس. يعني هكون داخل على طول مع حضراتكم في الموضوع. هو في الاول طبعا احنا بنتكلم على الانتخاب الوراثي او التحليل الوراثي للمزارع، وقد ايه هو بيقدر يساعدنا في المزرعه في اتخاذ قرارات كتير جدا هتكون موجوده معانا. لكن قبل ما نبدا، ليه الناس فكروا في ان انا ابتدي اعمل الانتخاب الوراثي، او ايه اللي خلينا نفكر في ان احنا لازم نغير من الشكل بتاعنا في تحديد احسن حيوان موجود في المزرعه عندنا، او احسن بقره موجوده، او ليه اصلا اغير الفكره بتاعتي علشان اختار المزرعه او اختار البقره الكويسه اللي هتقدر تكمل معايا ان شاء الله. طبعا بدايه بالموضوع، هو كان بيتكلم على ان في خلال 2050 احنا هيكون وصل عددنا لاكثر من 9 مليار بني ادم موجودين على وجه الارض. منهم طبعا ده بيقول لحضرتك ان انت ممكن توصل لان يبقى عندنا واحده صين ثانيه، واحده من الهند ثانيين. طبعا التوسع السكاني العالمي ده هيخلينا ان احنا بنحتاج لكميه من البروتين وكميه من الالبان اكتر تقريبا من الضعف علشان نقدر نكفي الكميه دي كلها. ده بغض النظر ان ان احنا طبعا هيحصل منافسه شديده على الارض والميه اللي موجودين وكل الموارد اللي موجوده. بالتالي اكتر مكانين اتاثروا او اكتر حاجتين اتاثروا هو الانتاج الحيواني، هو اكتر حاجات اتاثرت، وطبعا الانتاج الزراعي. هو كان بيتكلم ان احنا هنحتاج طبعا زي ما اتكلم اكتر تقريبا من ضعف كميه اللحمه، وبالتالي طبعا عشان اقدر اوصل للكميه دي فانا محتاج ازرع اكتر من ضعف الكميه علشان اقدر اغذي الحيوانات دي كلها اللي هتساعدني في المزرعه. بالتالي لازم يكون النمو بتاع المزارع او النمو بتاع المزارع لازم يكون بطريقه راسيه وليس افقيه. انا لازم اخلي ان كل حيوان عندي بيديني اعلى نتيجه، اعلى من ان هو يديني بس كميه حيوانات اكتر، او المزرعه تبقى عندي بنسب حيوانات اكتر. زي ما هو اتكلم، احنا لو بنكبر بس بنسبه عدديه جدا اللي هي 2.5% كل سنه، انا هحتاج اكتر من 19 مليون لتر لبن في السنه علشان اقدر اكفي. الصين ذات نفسها كبلد غير مكتفيه، او يعني غير عامله بالاكتفاء الذاتي اللي هي مكفيه 81% فقط لا غير، هي محتاجه 8 مليار لتر لبن سنويا زياده. روسيا كذلك اكبر بلد في العالم حجما من حيث السعه الجغرافيه، مكفيه 82% منها بس، لكن هي هتحتاج اكثر من 6.6 مليار لتر لبن سنوي. فاذا بالتالي حتى اكبر بلاد في العالم من حيث التعداد السكاني او من حيث التعداد الجغرافي مش قادرين يكفوا نفسهم. بالتالي كان لازم الناس تفكر في ازاي اقدر اخرج اعلى كفاءه من الحيوان ذات نفسه اكتر من ان انا ازود عدد الحيوانات اللي موجوده. علشان كمان ان الاستهلاك للفرد الواحد من اللبن في السنه الواحده اكتر من 15 كيلو لبن، وده زاد في اخر 20 سنه اكتر من 15 كيلو لبن في السنه بالنسبه للفرد من منتجات اللبن، اللي هيزيد في خلال ال 10 سنين الجايين اكتر من 20 كيلو بالنسبه للفرد. ودي طبعا نسبه عاليه جدا بالنسبه لكل فرد قصاد الانتاج اللي موجود عالميا. وده اللي مخلينا ان احنا اتجهنا الى الانتخابات الوراثيه علشان اقدر اشوف افضل جينات وراثيه موجوده لكل عجل او كل بقره موجوده عشان اخد منها اعلى كفاءه. زي ما هو اتكلم بالظبط ان مصادر الدخل اللي موجوده للمزرعه هي زي اول حاجه مصدر الحليب، والحليب ده بيكون لي من 3 حاجات، سواء كميه الحليب ذات نفسها، او سواء من مكوناته ووجود الفيتامينات والمينرالز والمعادن اللي موجوده اللي فيه، او جوده اللبن ذات نفسه من عدد الدهون او الدهن اللي موجود جوه اللبن. سواء المزرعه دي كلها بتبيع العجول الذكور او الفئران علشان تقدر تجيب لها دخل ذات نفسها، سواء ذبح الابقار الاضطراري او اي حاجه، او تحويلها الى لحم بعد ما خلصت عدد المواسم بتاعتها، او سواء زي ما هو كان اتكلم على جرد البقر او جلد البقر ذات نفسه، ان انا بخرج عدد كبير من البقر واعمل تبديل بالعجلات لدخول عدد جديد من العجلات الصغيره اللي هتبتدي تنتهي تكون هي البقر الرئيسي اللي موجود في المزرعه وهو اللي شايل المزرعه. ولكن طبعا قصادها الناحيه الثانيه وهي التغذيه، وهو زي ما اتكلم ان اكثر من 50% من استهلاك المزرعه بيكون في النفقات العامه، سبيشالي التغذيه، او اول حاجه التغذيه وهو اكثرها. ثاني حاجه طبعا حاجات بقى المتغيرات زي العماله ذات نفسها اللي موجوده، سواء الدكتور البيطري او الوقايه ذات نفسها، والادويه والمشاكل دي كلها اللي موجوده معانا. اكتشفوا ان النهارده موجود اكثر 25% بقره كويسه بياكل المصادر الدخل بتاعتهم اقل 25% موجودين، فانا موجود عليا في البقر او موجود عندي في المزرعه حمل تقيل من اقل 25% موجودين بيكلفوني تكلفه لانتاج لتر اللبن الواحد اعلى بكتير من دبل الكميه، تقريبا ضعف الكميه. تاني حاجه الريبليسمنت كوست او التبديل بتاعهم ذات نفسه، البقر ده مكلفني اكتر من ضعف الكميه او اكتر من ضعف الفلوس اللي بتكلفني عشان البقره نفسها تفضل موجوده. بالتالي هو كان بيدور ان احنا ازاي بالانتخاب الوراثي اوصل لحاجه اسمها البقره الخفيه اللي تبقى موجوده عند حضرتك. كل مزرعه احنا بنشرف عليها او بنكون موجودين فيها دايما بيبقى عندنا البقر الخفي. البقره الخفيه هي البقره اللي في المزرعه اللي بتكون عند حضرتك بتيجي كل يوم. البقره دي بتحلب الحليب المطلوب منها. البقره دي بيتم فحصها بس 3 مرات، حضرتك بتشوفها 3 مرات في وقت حياتها كل سنه، عباره عن مره وقت الولاده، مره بعديها وقت الكشف عليها علشان اتاكد من الصحه العامه بعد الولاده، والمره الثالثه هي وقت التلقيح بتاعتها علشان اقدر ادخلها في الموسم بتاعها اللي بعده في وقت العشر. لكن البقره دي لا بشوفها في وقت الحظاير التعبانه بتاعت البقر المريض ذات نفسه، فهي بقره لا بتشوف مرض، بتشوف منها مرض من التهابات الضرع، ولا بقدر اشوف منها التهابات من التهابات الرحم، ولا بقدر اشوف منها من مشاكل العرق ذات نفسها. فبالتالي انهي عجلات هقدر اشوفها في المستقبل هي البقر بتاع المستقبل بتاعي، ده اللي بقدر اساعد حضرتك بيه من خلال تقديم الانتخابات الوراثيه. كمان احب اقول لحضرتك ان البقره الخفيه دي هي فعلا البقره المنتجه بالنسبه لي، لان هي بتوفر لي فلوس كتير جدا من مشاكل المرضى اللي هي بتديهاني. تاني حاجه عندها عمر اطول فتقدر تديني فلوس اكتر، وبالتالي تقدر تقلل من المصاريف عليها، وفي نفس الوقت هي بتديني قصادها الناحيه الثانيه مكاسب من خلال اللبن ومن خلال الولدات ومن خلال اللحمه بتاعتها. كمان عايز اقول لحضرتك ان هم اكتشفوا ان على الاقل البقره لازم تقعد من موسم ونص ل2 موسم علشان تسدد التكاليف من خلال تربيتها في خلال اول سنتين دول. معنى كده ان انا لازم اختار احسن عجله موجوده علشان اقدر اوصل لاكثر من 2 موسم. البقره المنتجه هي دي البقره المربحه بالنسبه لي. بناء على كده المزارع اللي بتتاسس على اسس وراثيه صحيحه هي المزارع اللي فعلا هتقدر في المستقبل تنافس في الهدف الاقتصادي اللي موجود، وده اللي احنا بنقدر نقدمه لحضراتكم من خلال الجينيتك تيستنج. علشان كده لان في الاول كانت الناس كلها بتعتمد على النظره، انا اقول انا هختار العجله دي شكلها كويس او العجل ده شكله كويس، فاكتشفوا ان زي ما حضراتكم شايفين على الشمال كده 1% فقط هو نسبه الدقه، واقل من 1% كمان هي نسبه النظر. لو انا باخد البقره من خلال النظر بداوا ان هم يطوروها وخلوها بالبيرنت، او ان انا النهارده بشوف البيديجري، بشوف الاب والام بتاع العجله دي كلها دول اخبارهم ايه، دول الموسم بتاعتها ايه، ولكن اكتشفوا ان هم مش قادرين يدوني اكتر من دقه 30% فقط لا غير، ما بقدرش اخد اكتر من 30%. اكتشفوا لما احنا جينا اشتغلنا على الانتخاب الوراثي وصلت النتيجه لاكثر من 70%. بالتالي التحليل الوراثي هو اللي بيصنع فعلا الفارق في ربحيه اي قطيع عنده اساس وراثي صحيح. ليه؟ لان هم اكتشفوا ان في الاخر لو انا عندي عجله عملت لها انتخاب وراثي، العجله دي وصلت لاكثر من 8 سنين موجودين من الانتاج والاعطاء لهذه المزرعه. علشان كده انا بقول لحضرتك انا بعتمد على الانتخاب الوراثي في اختيار العجلات اللي انا في المستقبل هكون بستبدلها. بحتاجها كمان علشان اقدر احط العجلات دي في احسن وقت للتناسليات وفي ادخلها في برامج التناسليات علشان في الاخر تديني افضل بقر او افضل بقر حلاب موجود عشان يديني اعلى انتاجيه، كمان يكون اقل صحه وافضل صحه، بالتالي ان هو ما بيشوفش منه امراض وبالتالي ما بيستنزفش مني من موارد المزرعه. فبالتالي حضرتك قصاد حضرتك 3 حاجات حضرتك ممكن نقدر نحطهم، او 3 خطط نقدر نحطهم مع بعض، ودي كان اخر نقطه هو اتكلم عليها. يا اما حضرتك تحط خطه مستقبليه قريبه، خطه مستقبليه وفي تكون وسطيه، وخطه مستقبليه بعيده. تمام؟ الخطط ال3 دول انا بقدر اوفرهم معاك كمان عن طريق الجينوميك، مش بس بديك واحده منهم، انا بدي لحضرتك ال3. لان الخطه المستقبليه القريبه او الخطه القريبه يعني ذات نفسها هي خطه ما بقول حضرتك هتقدر لما اختار العجلات الصحيحه او العجلات الكويسه انا هبيع العجلات دي فبالتالي هيخش لي دخل كويس جدا جدا. تاني الخطه اللي هي القريبه او الوسطيه او الخطه المستقبليه الوسطيه، وهي خطه تقريبا دي من 3 ل 5 سنين. دي انا بقول لحضرتك ان انت هتكون بتختار العجلات اللي هي بقت بقر فبالتالي بقى عندي صحه اقل وبالتالي بقى عندي انتاجيه اعلى. الخطه المستقبليه الاكثر هو بقر انتاج عالي جدا جدا، امراض قليله جدا جدا، وبالتالي انا خدت افضل انتاج من كل البقر ده. ده اول فتره. انا اسف جدا اذا كنت طولت عليكم، بس حاولت ان انا اكون سهل وسريع في كل الحتت بتاعه اللي هو شرحها في اول محاضره. انا كده خلصت يا دكتور حسين الجزء بتاعي، وانا هنتظر لو كده انتوني ان شاء الله هو اللي يخش يكمل الجزء الثاني. I will leave the mic to Anthony and then I will explain or I'll translate what he said afterwards.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Hussein. Really appreciating your great summary. Thank you very much. Anthony, the floor is yours. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you, gentlemen. Get the correct screen up. There we go. So as Hussein and Brett summarized and laid out for us, genomic testing brings a lot of value to modern dairy production. And at Zoetis, we're really focused on better outcomes and how we ensure that you receive better outcomes through your genomic testing investment. There we go. Now you should see my screen. Apologies. Microsoft is not quite performing the way I want. Let me adjust this real quick. Hey Hussein, will you take the ball back real quick? My third monitor is not behaving correctly.
You mean? I guess Brett, he has your presentation. He can share it.
No, it's a hardware glitch on my end. I just need you guys to take the ball from me so I can actually see where it is. There we go.
Okay. دكتور حسين، هو لو حد عنده سؤال احنا ممكن نفتح سؤاله. هو بس عايز يقعد 5 دقيقتين او 3 بيعدل بس، يعني بيظبط حاجه في البرزنتيشن عشان بس يقدر يعرضها بطريقه مظبوطه. فلو هو شيرنج تاني اهو. تمام. Everything is going well now, Anthony?
I think so. You guys can see the presentation mode, right?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we can see it.
We see it very well.
Yeah, my hardware had a little bit of a glitch there, so apologies.
No worries.
As I was saying, we're really focused on better outcomes through genomic testing, and we want to make sure that you're receiving the largest return on your genomics investment. Because what we typically see and what you're really concerned about on the farm day to day when you're managing the dairy cows is how they're performing or their phenotype, right? It's the milk she's putting in the bulk tank. It's how many days open she is. It's her ability to avoid mastitis. It's her ability to stay in the herd for a long period of time. And when we talk to dairy producers, they're really concerned about a quiet cow or a cow that is invisible. And it's invisible in terms of computer records. So when you go into Dairy Comp or Affy Milk or whatever your computer system is, you don't see that animal. It doesn't incur a lot of management expenses. It's something like Beltzvold Vale Scott Marr, this animal here on the screen. So this was an animal that produced in Wisconsin in the United States. She was 11 years old, and over the course of her lifetime, she produced just shy of 350,000 pounds of milk, or roughly what's that, about 120 kilograms of milk. And during the course of her productive life, she was diagnosed pregnant to the first service insemination every year. So 60 days in milk comes, her voluntary wait period ends, she's inseminated, and ultimately becomes pregnant. So her days open was very low. So her peak milk production, her days in peak milk production were very high. So that she became a very profitable animal in terms of both cash flow and long-term return on investment. But phenotype, or what we see in the dairy cow, that's a combination of really two main things. It's the environment, or it's our ability to provide the environment to allow that animal to express its potential. So that's the day-to-day management, that's the ration or the TMR that we're feeding the animal. That's our ability to cool the animals down when things get hot. And in the northern United States and in Canada, it's the ability to keep them warm during the winter. That's the ability, just to extract and really provide the best environment possible for that animal. And so that's what you as managers really focus on, is providing that maximum environment. So that when you extract value from the genetics, those two things synergize into the phenotype that we desire. And for a lot of farms, genetics essentially ends at sire selection. They haven't paid a lot of attention to the genetics of the females, because up until 2010, our ability to accurately describe genetic merit in a female cow was pretty low. We didn't have the resolution to actually take good decisions on that information. And that's because when we look at an animal, we just look at its genetic merit on paper without genomic information, we have to consider that all siblings are the same. And so up until 2008, 2009, and really in 2010, when genomic testing became commercially available, this is what we had to deal with. The two parents, the yellow and the blue bars, they'd give us an offspring that was the perfect blend, or that green bar. And each generation, the two parents would combine roughly or contribute 50% of the DNA, and we assumed that was a perfect blend. But if we think back to our university days and our days of understanding biology, this real basic biology in terms of how cell division occurs, we know that's not exactly right. What we know is that DNA is passed on in chunks. So that a little bit of the blue chromosome, a large segment of the yellow chromosome, a smaller segment of the blue, more yellow, more blue. And so during cell division, during creation of the sperm and the egg, that DNA gets reshuffled around through those meiotic recombinations. And so each individual is really genetically distinct. And this is a concept that a lot of us are familiar with, especially those of us that have kids or that have siblings. So my little brother, my younger brother, he's not exactly little, my younger brother, he's a little bit more than 2 meters tall, and he weighs roughly 90 kilograms. I am less than 2 meters tall, probably closer to 1.8 meters. And it's been a long time since I've weighed 90 kilograms. And we're full siblings. So we have the same parents, the same mom, the same dad. And that variation, that genetic variation, is present even within one family. And that's what we see in cows as well. So that siblings don't inherit the same DNA. And so when we look at animals, we try to rank them and take decisions on that information, we can't assume that all siblings are created equal. And our research and development group here at Zoetis has asked that question. Given what we know about the DNA, where DNA, this recombination, where these recombination events take place, this exchange of DNA, what is the possible number of combinations from one mating? So if you take the same sire and mate her against the same cow, how many genetically distinct animals do you think would be possible? Now, if we're doing this face-to-face in a room there in Riyadh, I'd probably pause and give you guys a chance to postulate an answer or offer a suggestion. But just keep that number in mind. Because from our calculations, when we look at the number of recombination events and how the DNA interacts with itself, our calculations indicate there's more than 1.15 quintillion possible combinations. So from one mating, we would expect to see 1.15 quintillion genetically distinct animals. And when we look at on paper, without genomic information, every single one of these animals looks the same because they have the same parent average. So personally, 1.15 quintillion, that's a really hard number for me to wrap my head around. Like, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that I have a better chance of being selected at random to be the next president of the United States than I have of actually finding two animals having identical genetic merit. Right? So the statistics and the biology, it's really working against us here. So we have to use a little bit more than just parent average in order to make accurate ranking decisions. And that's where genomics really shines. And so at a high level, genomics is a branch of biological science that is concerned with the development and utilization of DNA sequence, its structure, and its function. So academic scientists, government scientists, they want to understand how the DNA fits together and then what the impact of the DNA is on the animal's performance. From a commercial standpoint or applicability standpoint, genomics is a little different. We want to understand what the DNA is and where it's located, but we're much more focused on the impact of that DNA or those differences in the DNA. And one of the ways we measure differences or genomic differences is through whole genome arrays. So these SNP chips. Now down here on the bottom, this is a picture of a real SNP chip, similar to the ones that we use today in our lab. And historically, commercial genomics use low density SNP chips, 3K, 6K, 20K, 35K, etc. So anything below 50,000 markers or 50K, that was considered low density. And through a process called imputation, where we use statistics to predict the most likely genotype, we can take the low density genotypes and with an educated guess, fill in the blanks. So we take a 6K or 20K or 35K, and we use imputation to bring it up to 50K. The advantages, especially in the early days, was that drove down the cost. We could look at fewer DNA markers, get the same value as a high or a higher chip. The requirement or the prerequisite there is you need a reference population of higher density genotypes. And hopefully you'll notice here that this is breed species agnostic. It doesn't matter if it's sheep, cattle, camels, horses, dogs, cats, and a modern genetic evaluation, the imputation step would be very similar. You need a reference population, and then it's a mathematical calculation. The end product is a high degree of accuracy. Now we have a range there of 96 to 99. In reality, in the last 4 years, that imputation accuracy is greater than 0.99. We make very few mistakes with imputation. In the genetic evaluation, there is a list of informative markers or single nucleotide polymorphisms that are used. And so these are the pieces of DNA that we know can convey impact. We know that they actually inform the animal's performance. Back in 2010, that informative SNP list, that started at 50,000 markers. And in the last 10 years, at the CDCB, they've continually increased that marker set, going from 50 to 60 to 70 to 80,000 markers. So the CDCB is the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding. And it's that organization that conducts the genetic evaluation for the United States dairy industry. So if you're buying bulls from ABS, Worldwide Sires, Gen X, Sexting Technologies, those types of organizations, they'll be advertising milk production values, net merit dollars, cheese merit. Those are all CDCB values. And as part of the genetic evaluation, the CDCB also has some higher density markers or SNP chips, these 770K genotyping chips, and in some rare instances, whole genome sequence. That's where they've actually gone through and they've sequenced the entire genome of an animal. So it's roughly 3 billion base pairs in a Holstein cow, and similar number in a Jersey or Angus or in a Simmental. There's a little bit of variation, but roughly 3 billion. So if it's 770 or 3 billion pieces of DNA, the genetic evaluation can't use all of that information. And so it gets brought down through a process of masking, or they ignore the non-informative markers, mainly to reduce file size. So a whole genome sequence, it's going to be gigabytes in size. And if you don't need that much information, it doesn't do us any good, and so we just ignore it. And we see these high density genotypes, these 770K or whole genome sequencing. It's most extensively used in R&D situations. And so they're extracting more value by generating genomic predictions off of those higher density genotypes. Again, they're masking that the non-informative markers and generating the same GPTAs that you get through a commercial test such as Clarified or Clarified Plus. In reality, the value of those ultra high density genotypes, it's very, very minimal. There is a point where the returns on those high density genotypes, they disappear, and it's essentially become a cost savings, or it's a cost issue. And so if you're not seeing value on it, it doesn't make sense to run those higher density genotypes, and we'd move forward with a lower density solution. So this process, these low, medium, and high density genotypes, this is, again, species agnostic. And the availability of these genotypes really reflects the industry's investment. So dairy cattle being a stationary production system, you have one site or multiple sites, but you're not moving from pasture to pasture or across hundreds or thousands of hectares. You know, it's very easy to record information about the cows and just to develop these performance databases. In the United States, that began for dairy cattle back shortly before the turn of the 20th century. So it was late 1800s, early 1900s, we started to see that data be collected, with other countries beginning that process and along a similar timeline. And so what's happened is that over time, we've built genetic evaluations to extract value from that information. So it really began or begins with phenotypic information. So how the animal performed, where it was located during that performance, and when that performance was located. So basically, how much milk did that animal produce in her first lactation? On what farm was she at? And when did she calve in? A dairy comp, Affy milk, uniform agri, those are all very easily accessible data points. It doesn't take much. And most of you have a very high skill level of doing that. You can go into your systems and collect that information very quickly. And I would suspect a lot of people look at that information daily or weekly to take decisions about which cows stay and which cows go. The pedigree information, that's pretty simple for a farm. It's not too complex. You record who the dam was, who the dam of the calf was, and who she was mated to, and now you've got the beginnings of a pedigree. From a scientific perspective, a pedigree is really a population scale family tree. We want to know mom, dad, sisters, brothers, aunts, cousins, 5 generations once removed. Like, we want as much information as we can get our hands on. And so when we say a population scale, it really is a population scale. Now, the depth of the pedigree, that will vary by animal and by country, but modern genetic evaluations have very deep pedigrees. And this really forms the foundation of a genetic evaluation. Without this information, it's very hard for genomics to add additional value. But with the appropriate investments and time, sometimes it's just investing the money to collect the information and the expertise to consolidate it into actionable data points, genomics can be easily added. And it's really genotypes. We're genotyping animals so we know what the DNA does, so we can help inform the pedigree and ultimately deliver high reliability and high accuracies. So with a modern genetic evaluation, these 3 data points, the pedigree, the phenotypes, and the genomic information, that's blended together into predictions and measures of confidence. And it's these predictions and measures of confidence that you're likely familiar with. When you're buying bulls, these are the milk values and their reliabilities. With genomic testing, you receive the same thing, except in a slightly different format. With genomic testing, instead of it being a book with pictures of the animals and each table describing the animal, the information is delivered as a table, because we're trying to manage the herd and not make specific selection decisions on 1 or 2 animals. If it's 1,000 cows, 5,000 cows, 100,000 cows, the process is very similar. Identify what's important to the farm, rank animals based off of that metric, and then start taking decisions. Because it's the decisions that are important. And we've had customers that historically, they never paid attention to genetics. One of which is very close to my home here in Michigan. He's about 3 hours away. And when he came out of college and went back to the farm, he decided that it was important for the long-term success of his farm to improve the genetic merit of the herd. Now, historically, they've been crossbred, and they'd really just been grade cows, just random matings. Whatever the Tuesday morning special was, that was the semen that they purchased from the AI stud. And as a result, their herd looked the same. Like they couldn't say what the merit of the animal was. They could see differences in production and performance, but they weren't exactly sure why. And then when we started genomically testing through Zoetis, things came into picture. So today, he does a really good job accurately ranking his animals. So he takes that random assortment of animals, you can fit them into a bell-shaped curve, and do a good job predicting who's the best and who's the worst. Now, his strategy has evolved over time, but that's as he's become more comfortable and confident with the technology. And again, this is all based off of what he values and what he feels is important to his farm. Now, don't get me wrong, we're doing a good job accurately ranking animals. Well, I don't want you to walk away with the assumption that the genomic testing is perfect. It is orders of magnitude or light years better than what we had in 2005, 2006, 2008, and 9. But it's not perfect. But I'll take genomics or taking decisions with genomic information over anything else any day of the week. We can do more with genomic information than we can with alternatives. And to do more, we really need to have greater confidence. When we have greater confidence, that improves the qualities of the decisions and subsequent outcomes. Again, we're really focused on the outcomes at Zoetis. If it was just about improving the genomic merit or genetic merit of the herd, that's pretty simple, but it doesn't help with management. And when we think about, or when we talk about the decisions that need to be made, there's really 3 that form the bedrock. First, do I want this animal in my herd? And for those of you that routinely purchase bull semen, this is a decision that you make quite frequently. But you make it almost exclusively on the bulls, right? When you're going through the bull catalog, say, all right, I want this bull, and I want this bull, or I like that bull, but his pedigree isn't quite right. That's the first selection decision. You're deciding if you want that animal in your herd, or more accurately, if you want that animal in your semen tank. On the female side of things, similar question. Do I want this animal in my herd? And how many animals can I remove without having a negative impact on my herd? The next question is, how many progeny do I want from this animal? Yeah, this informs how many straws of semen you buy on a bull. And then as complexity is added to a genomic strategy, that's where embryo transfer and in vitro fertilization comes in. Without those technologies, you can even do it with sex semen. And while it's not perfect, sex semen gives us more heifers. Gives us many more heifers than we do with conventional semen when managed correctly. And last but not least, who do I want to breed this animal to? So that's a direct reflection or acknowledgement that all animals are not perfect. Now, all animals have strengths and they have weaknesses. And so maybe a cow, she gives us, 30,000 kilos of milk, which is great, but it takes 400 days to get her in calf, which is less than great. So those corrective matings or the answer to the who do I want to breed this animal to, that's the third question we try to answer with genetics. And when we take those decisions with genomic information, our confidence improves greatly. And so the subsequent outcomes are much, much better. So we have a more sustainable herd that gives us more milk, is more fertile, avoids health events, mastitis, lameness, metritis, respiratory disease. Focus on making the herd that you need. And again, it's what you need, not what we think you need. So this is all great aspirational statements, but what does that translate to? Well, it translates into something like this. So when we go and we look at an animal's genetic merit, what did she do in terms of performance? In this case, 305-day mature equivalent milk production. So here the scale on the y-axis, that's listed in pounds. So divide that roughly by 2 to convert it into kilograms. And on the x-axis, we have the deciles of genetic merit. We've taken the animal's milk predictions and ranked them top to bottom. Our worst genetic merit is here on the left, and our best genetic merits here on the right. So this graph is from one herd. I believe this herd is in Wisconsin, if I remember correctly. And we do these analyses globally. It's part of the service that we provide, and it helps our customers understand, what they're actually getting from genomics, or how their cows are performing, and if there's opportunities to improve the management. And this is a pretty nice graph. I would say this is typical. Our worst group here on the left, they're dragging up the bottom. They're doing okay at a little bit more than 14,000 kilograms of milk. Our best is really rocking at more than 15,000 kilograms of milk, and all shades in between. But what we want to see is a nice linear progression through the middle. That means it's working. Now, how steep that progression is, or how steep that slope is, that's where management comes into play. We would expect that for each point of milk, or GPTA for milk, a farm can get 2 pounds of milk. So if we say the genetic merit is 100 pounds, we'd expect to see 200 pounds. And that's a reflection of how the predictions work. And it's really not a detail to get super caught up on. But that deviation from 2 is important. Greater than 2 means that the management system is really, really good. It means that they're able to extract more genetic merit from their animals than other farms. Our average is 3.5 to 4 when we do these analyses, and our record is 6. So there's a herd that's able to get 6 pounds of milk per point of PTA out of their cows, which is phenomenal. It's so phenomenal that we triple check the math to make sure that we didn't have a glitch in the data set. And they've essentially become the gold standard for their area. That farm is they know their cows so well, they're so well in tune with their cows that they're getting what we expect them to receive from their cows 300% fold over. Which is really, really good. But milk isn't the only thing that's important. And so when we ask producers, what's important for your farm? Like, tell us what's the most important thing. Like, production almost always is number 1. And while we agree production is important, you have to have production that you can sell. And really, you want efficient production or sustainable production. Production where we're not turning heifers over every 10 months. We're not having to dump 20% of the bulk tank because, you know, they're being treated for mastitis or metritis or lameness. And with genomic testing and genomic technologies, we can actually do some of those things. We can improve the animals for health and wellness. And so that's what we've done at Zoetis, and we've created some proprietary predictions that improve cow wellness. So this example in the next couple of slides will be examples of that. This is retained placenta. So what we've done is we've ranked animals top to bottom. We've broken them out into quartiles. So our worst 25%, 26 to 50th, 51st to 76, and then our best 25%. We didn't know what the animal's performance was. We just said, you know what? We can see what you inherited based off your DNA. This is what we think you're going to do. Let's see what happens. You go be you go produce. Your management team will manage you the way you see fit, they see fit. And in a year, we'll come back and we'll look to see how well you performed. And our worst group had an incidence of 4.45% for retained placenta. And the best group had an incidence of 1.58% of retained placenta. So again, nice linear progression through the middle, numerical differences between the groups, which is good. But as a scientist, I want to see statistical differences, which are indicated by these superscripts and the p-value up here. A high level of significance in this finding. And this was published in the Journal of Dairy Science back in 2017. So if you're interested, we'd be happy to provide you with a copy of this manuscript. I will add that today, these results actually look better. This was early on in the study. We published it, and we continue to track these cows through time. What we've seen is that this worst group continues to accumulate cases of retained placenta at a greater incidence than the best group. And it's roughly a twofold reduction. So our worst group has roughly twice the incidence of our best group. Well, that's great for retained placenta, but that's not the only thing we're trying to manage on our cows. There's a litany of things that we'd like to improve. And so when we looked at all the traits that were available that we thought we could generate predictions on, we targeted the ones that have the highest economic impact on dairy management, both in terms of incidence and raw dollars or raw reals, right? And so we developed predictions for metritis, mastitis, lameness, displaced abomasums, ketosis, and they all perform very similar. Nice linear progression with roughly a twofold reduction. DA's is quite a bit better at 94% reduction. The predictions work. And so we've leveraged that approach, and we've expanded out into calf wellness as well, with calf livability, calf respiratory disease, and calf scours. So we have predictions for production, predictions for wellness, for health events. So we got a productive cow, a cow that can avoid health events. So that's great. And that's not it. What about fertility? Fertility is really important for a dairy cow. I think all of us will agree there that the longer a cow is open, the less money she makes us, and the more likely she is to leave the farm before she's paid back on her development costs. You know, that I think Brett said it was 11,000 to 16,000 reals. I can't do the math that quick in my head. The numbers I quote are usually $1,500 to $2,500 US. That large investment to get her into the milk stream. So if we agree that reproduction is important to getting a profitable animal, we want to see that reproduction works as well. And it does. And there's predictions available for days open. So this is daughter pregnancy rate, or DPR. And while it's expressed as a percentage, what DPR actually does is it predicts an animal's days open. That's the underlying phenotype. It's how many days were required to get that animal pregnant. And so when we associate fertility or our daughter pregnancy rate with days open, this is a pretty typical response. The average cow in the worst 25%, took her about 137, 138 days to become pregnant. Whereas the average cow in our best genetic group, averaging about 116, 117 days. So for ease of calculation, let's call it 2 weeks. Right, so it's 14 days, or on average, 2 full weeks in calf sooner. 2 full weeks less days open. And there's some cows in here, they do really good. They conceive to that first service. We've already talked about cows like that. So their days open is 0 or 1. And there's others that are, they get up in there into the 130, 140 range. But on average, this best group is 116 versus our worst group being up there about 140. Real tangible results, right? Impactful results to your farm. So we know the technology works. We know genomics helps inform better decision making. Well, how does that translate into money, right? For the vast majority of dairy farms, the dairy is a business. It is intended to generate revenue through the sale of typically milk, and in some instances, elite genetics, and maybe some terminal animals as well. You can sell those dairy bull calves for a significant amount of money, depending on your country. But for a dairy that's focused on milk, and that's the main revenue driver, which is probably true for everybody on the call today, how can we combine all of these traits into one piece of information that you can take actionable decisions with? That type of data point, or that decision point, that's called a selection index. And so Brett touched on that earlier with total performance index, TPI, from the Holstein Association. And so that value, that's available for animals that are tested through the CECB. We've seen internationally that dairy bulls are sold primarily on that. If you look at sheep, like in New Zealand, they have a similar index, New Zealand maternal worth or New Zealand terminal worth. They do the same thing. They're intended to convey an animal's genetic merit, and its totality. So it's production, longevity, fertility, anything that could either generate revenue or incur costs. So it's trying to strike the appropriate balance between generating a lot of revenue and keeping costs down. Because we know that if we just select for milk production, let's say, we're going to have to feed that animal a lot more feed, or likely get a larger framed animal, and her reproduction is going to suffer. So finding that appropriate balance, and it's a lot of science and it's a bit of art. And what we've done at Zoetis is we've constructed a selection index for dairy animals called Dairy Wellness Profit, or DWP dollars, just to ignore the units because the currency is really not relevant. It's just a way that we balance the traits against each other, because you have to balance pounds of production or kilograms of milk production against days open. And so you need a common unit of expression in order to do that. And we use currency in that exercise. And what we've done here is we've used the dairy wellness profit values, and we've assigned animals again to genetic groups. Our worst, 26th to 50th, our 51st to 75th percentile, and our best 25%. And so we knew what the genetic potential of the animals were, but we didn't have the animal's performance. We didn't know what she actually did. And so we approached some farms. There's 5 farms included in this study that was published in the Journal of Dairy Science late last year. And again, we can provide you with this manuscript if you're interested. And we said, hey, we'd like to determine how effective DWP is at predicting lifetime profitability. We have to make some assumptions when we create these indexes, and we'd like to test to see if our assumptions were correct. And so our partner farm said, sure, I'd be willing to participate. What do you need? In reality, it's a backup of their computer system, and then how much they were paid for production, and how much they had to spend on certain things, like how much a day open cost the farm, what their feed costs were, what their antibiotic costs were, things like that. So when we added all those revenue generating activities at production and we corrected for the costs, we're able to generate observed lifetime profitability here on the y-axis. All right, so we did this for dairy wellness profit, but the premise is the same for any selection index. But when we do it for dairy wellness profit, with the production, the emphasis on wellness, the emphasis on fertility, longevity, on average, the animals in the worst 25% generated $167 of profit. Okay, so they're making money, that's good. On average, the cows in the worst 25% did generate revenue. They paid back their development costs, and they added a little bit of profit to the farm. But there are a fair number of animals that fell below the line. They calved in and they died on day 1. Or they made it through the first 30 days of lactation and they had too many cases of mastitis and they ended up getting culled. So there's more of the animals in the worst 25% that never made a profit. When we look at the animals in the best 25%, on average, $978, that's roughly tenfold greater, right? 10 times, 100 to 1,000, about 10 times more profitable per animal basis. So many, many, many more of these animals lasted a long time. They were fertile. They avoided health events. They had sufficient production to meet their daily inputs and produce a profit for the farm. And striking this appropriate balance is the challenge. And that's really what we spend a lot of time with or on at Zoetis, is understanding what's important for the farm and how we can help you achieve your goals, right? Because if we don't understand what you're trying to do, you're unlikely to use the information. And if you're unlikely to use the information, then it's really hard to use genomic technology to meet your objectives, to contribute to the vision for 2030, for just make a more sustainable farm. Again, it's a balance between producing a lot of milk, but doing it efficiently in an area of limited resources. And it doesn't matter if it's in Saudi Arabia, or Europe, or the American Southwest, or Brazil, resources aren't unlimited. I mean, Brett did a really good job describing that. And by 2050, we have to increase our food production as a species or as a society significantly. We really do think that genomic technology is one of the ways you can get there. And with that, I'll break and let Hussein summarize what I've talked about and then hand it over to Brett to close us out.
Thanks a lot, Anthony. Thanks a lot for this nice and informative presentation. Really, really appreciating your knowledge and the updates. Hussein, can you please
yes,
start your presentation? Yes, please, the floor is yours.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, very well.
معلش دقيقة واحدة بس. Is that better؟ ده كده كويس يا دكتور؟
Excellent, thank you.
شكرا. طبعا بعد الكلام اللي هو قاله يعني احب ان انا اتنقل مع حضراتكم للجزء الثاني من المحاضره، واللي كان بيشرحها حاليا دكتور أنتوني ماكنيل، وكان بدأ في المحاضره وهو بيتكلم على الوراثه وعلاقتها بالبيئه، او علاقه البيئه اللي الحيوان قادر يعيش فيها وعلاقتها بالوراثه او التاثير الجيني على الحيوان ذات نفسه. طبعا احنا الحيوانات كلها بتعيش في بيئه مختلفه، كلها في ناس زي ما هو كان بيشرح ان في ناس، في حيوانات عايشه في السعوديه، وفي ناس حيوانات عايشه في مصر، واللي عايشين في امريكا، واللي عايشين في اوروبا. فكل واحده، كل حيوان ذات نفسه بيعيش في مكان، طبعا البيئه المحيطه به ليها تاثير قوي جدا عليها. لكن هو كان برضو عايز يقول حاجه، ان حتى الحيوانات اللي عايشه في نفس البيئه، في نفس الشكل، في نفس كل حاجه، كلهم بيولدوا بطريقه مختلفه، او كلهم عندهم تعبير للجيني بيطلع مختلف. حتى التوائم، لو حتى وصلت ان هو كان في توائم ما بين من نفس الاب ونفس الام وكل حاجه، والتوائم كمان والاخوات والتوائم، كل دول بيقدروا ان هم يطلعوا الجين، او يقدروا ان هم يظهروا الجين ذات نفسه بطريقه مختلفه. بالتالي ان الجينات ليها اكبر تاثير، او بالتالي عشان كده هم فكروا ان هم ازاي يقدروا يحسنوا من الجينات دي، علشان يقدروا يعملوا لها تيستنج، عشان حضرتك تقدر توصل انك تاخد احسن نتيجه في احسن عجله، او في احسن عجل موجود حتى في المزرعه، عشان نقدر نشوفه. ولما جه شرح الموضوع ده عشان نقدر نعمل محددات التحليل الوراثي، لو احنا افترضنا احنا كنا مع بعض وجينا جبنا احسن عجل موجود في السوق، احسن عجل حضرتك شايفه في المزرعه، واحسن طلوقه موجوده في المزرعه، وحطينا قصادها احسن بقره كمان هي موجوده في المزرعه، اللي انا شايفهم دول احسن نتائج دايما، واحسن واقل امراض موجوده، واحسن نتائج، واعلى مواسم، واعلى نسبه لبن، وكل الكلام ده كله انا حطيت الاثنين دول قصاد بعض، وبالتالي انا جبت منهم وتوقعي ان انا هجيب منهم افضل عجل موجود في المزرعه، او افضل عجله كمان موجوده في المزرعه. ولكن احب اقول لحضرتك حاجه، حضرتك محتاج تعيد النظر تاني في الموضوع ده. ليه؟ لان هم اكتشفوا ان مع وجود احسن اب واحسن ام، وانا برضو متوقع ان انا الاقي احسن عجل، لا، ده هم اكتشفوا ان انا هقع في احتماليه ما بين 1 و1.5 كوانتيليون، والعدد ده اللي هو 1 وبعديه 18 صفر موجودين، ان انا الاقي نفس الجينات اللي موجوده في الاب، او نفس الجينات اللي موجوده في الام او البقره، ان هي تطلع لي في نفس العجل. احب اقول لحضرتك ان دي ابعد حاجه موجوده، علشان كده هم قعدوا يفكروا، طب انا لو فضلت قاعد واخدها بالنظر هعمل ايه؟ عشان كده هم بداوا يقولوا حضرتك ان التناسليات هي مش فن، ولكن الفن هو التحليل الوراثي، عشان حضرتك تقدر تطلع افضل جينات موجوده، عشان تقدر تاخد في الاخر اعلى نتائج تقدر تاخدها من كل بقره ومن كل عجل موجودين، علشان اقدر انمي مزرعتي، عشان اقدر اكبر المزرعه بتاعتي، عشان اقدر اوصل لاعلى نتائج باقل تكلفه كمان موجوده. طيب برضو علشان هم يثبتوا الموضوع ده، جم عملوا زمان تحدي ما بين عجلتين كانوا شايفينهم، وحطوهم قصاد الناس وقالوا انتوا شايفين من وجهه نظركم انهي عجله تبقى افضل، بانهي شكل، وانهي قوام، وانهي انتاجيه من الاب والام. طبعا كل الناس راحت على، كانت عجلتين، واحده اسمها اليس وواحده اسمها بوتس، اللي على اليمين اللي هي البيضه وهي اليس، كل الناس قالت لك طبعا اليس هي الافضل، وبوتس دي بقره. طبعا كانوا شايفين زمان ان الكوت الاسمر ده شيء ينم على ان هي مش هتكون عجله كويسه في المستقبل، وان هي في الاخر البرودكشن بتاعها او الانتاجيه بتاعتها هتبقى قليله جدا جدا، وانتاجيه الحليب منها هتكون اقل انتاجيه. لما جم بعديها وجم يحددوا وشافوا، لقوا ان في اول موسم طبعا العجله اللي هي اليس بدات ان هي تنتج انتاج قوي جدا، وبدات بدايه قويه في اول سنه ليها، ولكن مع بدايه الموسم الثاني ليها اليس بدات بدايه قويه، ولكن بدات تقع في مشاكل صحيه رهيبه، وبدات تقع وفي الاخر ادت ان هي ما جابتش التكلفه بتاعه التربيه بتاعتها، وبالتالي ما حققتش اي نجاح خالص بالنسبه لي جوه المزرعه، ولا حققت اي ربح، اي مصدر ربح تماما. بالعكس هي كانت عبء على المزرعه رهيب، لدرجه ان هم اضطروا ان هم يمشوها على طول من المزرعه. على العكس من البقره الثانيه واللي هي بوتس، ان دي عاشت اكتر من 12 سنه في المزرعه، ادت كميه حليب اكتر من 200,000 طن على مدار ال 12 سنه، بكمان وجود دهن او بنسبه دهن توصل لحوالي 4%، وادت اكتر من 10 عجول حيين واكتر من 10 ولدات كمان، وكمان كانت في اقل من المشاكل المرضيه. ودي خليها، وهي دي المصدر او هو ده الربح اللي انا دايما بحب اشوفه من البقره او من العجله اللي انا بكون عايز اربيها او عايز استثمر فيها. فهو بيقول لحضرتك ان انت النهارده احنا عندنا جينات كتيره جدا جدا، احنا بنحاول نحدد افضل جينات تبقى موجوده، بنحاول ان احنا نوصل لافضل جينات موجوده، علشان في الاخر الغي الفكره بتاعت ان انا اتعامل مع الشكل الظاهري. طبعا هو اتكلم على ان بعد كده دخل موضوع السكسد سيمن، او اللي هو السيمن اللي هو السكسد، بيبقى ان انا عارف نوع الحيوانات المنويه دي سواء ذكور او سواء اناث، تمام. وبدا ان هو يستخدمها في التلقيحات الصناعيه، لقوا طبعا ان هي فعلا بتجيب نتائج، لان هم طبعا بيكونوا بيدوروا على الاناث اكتر واكتر، وبيحاولوا ان هم يجيبوا عدد من الاناث اكتر من الذكور في المزارع الحلاب، لان الهدف الرئيسي هو انتاج اللبن. ده بالنسبه لاي حد في الاول، فهم دايما بيدوروا على ان انا اجيب افضل عجله موجوده. عملت نجاح في الاول، ولكن مع الوقت ما قدرتش ان هي تعدي اكتر من نسبه معينه، وهي حوالي اكتر من ال 30% اللي كان بيتكلم عليها في الاول. علشان كده قبل ما بوصل لان انا اقول انا عايز اعمل تحليل وراثي، احنا بنقعد مع حضرتك وبرده في كام اسئله لازم نبقى عارفين اجاباتها وحضرتك تبقى عارفها. اولا، ايه هو تنسيب الحيوان اللي هقدر اختاره واقول ان انا هعمل مع الحيوان ده تحليل وراثي، وهو الاب والام. مين هم؟ لازم طبعا حضرتك في الاول في مزرعه سواء كبيره او صغيره وحضرتك بتعمل تلقيح صناعي، بتبقى جايب التلقيح الصناعي من سواء الشركات اللي هو ذكرها زي وورلد وايد ساير او ما خلافه. الحاجات دي كلها بتدي لحضرتك الباراجراف وبتقول لك ادي الاب وادي الام ذات نفسهم من السيمن ده ذات نفسه، والسيمن ده بيبقى في الكاركترستكس او في الصفات اللي حضرتك بتبقى محتاجها. انا محتاج مثلا وزن اكبر، محتاج قوام احسن او الكلام ده كله، ولكن لقوا برضو ان في الاول في الاخر ليها ليميتيشن، مش قادره تدي لحضرتك كل الصفات بتاعتها. تاني حاجه، انا بدخل على التاريخ الانتاجي لكل اب وام موجودين، سواء نسبه الحليب اللي الام بتنتجها، سواء عدد المواسم كمان اللي عدت على الام دي، انتجت كام موسم من الالبان، عدد الامراض او الامراض اللي هي مرت بيها، سواء مشاكل التهابات الرحم، سواء مشاكل التهابات الضلع، سواء مشاكل العرج اللي موجودين، ودول اخطر 3 امراض موجودين بالنسبه لاي مزرعه حلاب موجودين. كمان عدد الولدات اللي هي قدرت تديهاني علشان اقدر اقول. ومن كل دول الانعكاس اللي حصل في الولدات اللي قبل كده، هل الانعكاس ده حصل على الولدات اللي حصلت فعلا ادت او بنسبه ولو حتى صغيره على العجلات اللي نزلت من الاب والام دي؟ هل ده فعلا عملت اي نجاح في ان هي تزود من الربحيه بتاعه العجلات الصغيره ولا لا؟ كمان ان انا بعد كده بشوف ايه المتوقعات من الاداء الانتاجي اللي انا مستنيه من العجلات دي الموجوده. فانا ببدا في الاول بالنظر، لو هم بداوا زي المثلث اللي موجود ده، لكن بعد كده بداوا يحسبوها حسابيا، اعلى نسبه او اعلى نسبه اقدر اخدها من الاختيار العجلات هي عن طريق التحليل الوراثي او الانتخاب الوراثي زي ما هو كان بيشرح. كمان احب اقول لحضراتكم ان هو كان يعني بنتكلم ان النهارده اي عجله عندها حوالي 22,000 جين، هم قدروا يوصلوا ان انا اختار ازاي افضل جين وافضل اداء ان انا اقدر انصح حضرتك بيه، ولما اجي اعمل له التحليل اقدر اقسم المزرعه عندي ما بين عجلات انتاج ضعيف، ودي هبتدي ان انا امشيها، وعجلات انتاج متوسط، وعجلات انتاج عالي. لكن اهم من اننا نقول لحضرتك ايه هو التحليل الوراثي، اهم نقطه احنا دايما بنتكلم فيها وهي اتخاذ القرار. قبل ما احنا بنبدا مع حضرتك ونقول ان احنا عايزين نعمل تحليل وراثي، احنا بنسال حضرتك اهم سؤال: حضرتك عايز ايه؟ حضرتك محتاج ايه في المزرعه؟ ايه هو هدف حضرتك من التحليل الوراثي؟ او هدف حضرتك في المزرعه في المستقبل؟ حضرتك عايز مزرعتك تبقى فين من 3 سنين ل5 سنين؟ كانت ردود كتير جدا بتجيلنا، ناس تقول انا عايز اقلل مشاكل التهابات الضرع، ناس بتقول انا عايز اقلل مشاكل التهابات الرحم، انا عندي مشاكل كتير جدا في نسبه الانتاج، انا عندي نسبه قليله جدا من الاخصاب، انا عندي مشاكل قليله جدا من الولدات. فهو بالتالي انا لازم اعرف من حضرتك بتهدف لانتاج حليب اكتر، حضرتك بتهدف لانتاج عدد ولدات اكتر، حضرتك محتاج ايه؟ وده هو اول هدف احنا بنحدده مع بعض من الانتخاب الوراثي اللي احنا بنعمله عن طريق الكلاريفايد بلس. بس بعد ما احنا بنقعد مع حضرتك ونعرف كل ده ونبتدي ان احنا نخش في الانتخاب الوراثي، لازم تبقى حضرتك عارف لما بنرجع لحضرتك بنتيجه ان حضرتك لازم تاخد قرار، وده احنا بنساعد حضرتك على اتخاذ القرار ده. لكن لو حضرتك نويت انك تعمل انتخاب وراثي ونشتغل على الانتخاب الوراثي وبالتالي ما حصلش من حضرتك اي قرار اتاخد، بالتالي انا بقول لحضرتك ان انت وصلت لمرحله ان احنا صرفت فلوس على الفاضي واحنا ما قدرناش ان احنا ناخد افضل نتيجه من الانتخاب الوراثي. عشان كده اقول لحضرتك ان من خلال التحليل الوراثي حضرتك بتقدر تشوف قصاد حضرتك اعلى انتاجيه. تمام، انا بقدر احدد لحضرتك دي العجلات اللي هتبقى اعلى انتاجيه في المستقبل مع حضرتك، الصحه العامه واللي موجوده في الامراض ولا حضرتك برضو بتكون بتنبهني ليها وبتقول لي ان انت عايز تقلل ايه بالظبط، فانا بقول لك انهي عجلات اللي هتقدر تساعد حضرتك ان هي تقلل فيها نسب المشاكل المرضيه، وبالتالي تدي لحضرتك اعلى انتاجيه من الحليب او سواء الولدات او سواء حتى من العجول اللي بتدي في الاخر اللحم. كمان القدره التناسليه، بالتالي ان انا بقول لحضرتك ان انا هحاول بختار معاك افضل عجله موجوده، ان انا اقول لحضرتك امتى هتدخل العجله دي في موسم التناسليات بتاعها، امتى العجله دي هتريسبوند لاحسن سيمن موجود، سواء حضرتك استخدمت الحيوانات المنويه اللي هي مختاره سواء ان هي 6 سيمن، سواء كمان ان حضرتك ناوي ان انت تشوف انا محتاج نسبه لبن قد ايه، بتوصل لمرحله ان انا في الاخر بحولها مع حضرتك من عجله موجوده في المزرعه طبيعيه جدا للبقره الخفيه اللي احنا اتكلمنا عليها في المحاضره الاولانيه، البقره اقل امراض موجوده مع بقره اعلى انتاجيه، وفي الاخر ان انا ما بشوفهاش كتير. هم وصلوا ان هو كان بيقول كمان ان هم وصلت بيهم ان البقره ممكن توصل تعدي ال 140 يوم، ودي يعني دي اسوأ بقره عندهم، 140 يوم في الاوبن دايز او البقر المفتوح للتناسليات، تعدي ال 140 يوم، ودي بالنسبه لهم خساره كبيره جدا. ممكن البقره توصل ل $1500 مصاريف عليها عشان هم مش قادرين يدخلوها في التناسليات. لكن افضل بقره موجوده هي البقره اللي لا تتعدى ال 115 يوم في التلقيح الصناعي بعد الولاده، علشان اقدر اقول ان البقره دي بقره ممتازه ودي اعلى بقر بيجيبوا لنا. هو ده برضه اللي بيقدر يعمله الجينيتك تيستنج او اللي بيعمله الانتخاب الوراثي مع حضرتك عشان نقدر نوصل بيه لاعلى معدل من الربحيه. زي ما كنا بنتكلم ان الهدف الرئيسي من التحليل الوراثي مش بس زياده اللبن، هو زياده كمان كم اللبن ذات نفسه. حضرتك بتنتج حليب قوامه قوي جدا، حليب مباع مش حليب مليان، هل هو سواء ادويه او سواء حليب بنسبه دهن خفيفه جدا او نسبه دهن قليله، لا انا بدي لحضرتك افضل انتاجيه من انتاج اللبن مع الاختيار الصحيح للعجلات اللي هتكون في المستقبل هي الاساس بتاع المزرعه بتاعتي. وكل ده بيزد على ارقام وحسابات حضرتك بتشوفها قدامك وكلها بتتعمل ما بين زويتس وما بين حضرتك، ما بيننا وما بين حضرتك، علشان ندي لحضرتك افضل انتاجيه. طب احنا بنكشف كمان لحضرتك على ايه؟ بنكشف حضرتك احنا ما بيننا اللي هو الويلنس ريت او الصفات الصحيه الممتازه. انا بقول لحضرتك على نسب التهابات الضلع في المزرعه، نسب التهابات العرق في المزرعه او العرق في المزرعه عموما، التهابات الرحم في المزرعه، احتباسات المشيمه وما الى ذلك من كل المشاكل اللي احنا بنشوفها من الحيوانات. كمان العجول الصغيره بقدر اشوف نسب الحياه بتاعتهم، مشاكل الالتهابات الرئويه في العجول، مشاكل الاسهالات في العجول كمان، علشان دي اخطر المشاكل اللي احنا بنشوفها مع المزرعه. وفي المزرعه ذات نفسها كمان اقول لحضرتك ان احنا بنشوف نسبه الدهن في اللبن ومشاكل اللبن ذات نفسها، اقدر ازاي احدد نوعيه اللبن. ومؤخرا انضاف ليها كمان الريبرودكشن او مشاكل التناسليات كلها، علشان اقدر اقول لحضرتك البقره دي هتقعد مفتوحه لمده مثلا اكتر من 120 يوم ولا اقل، بيزد على الانتخابات الوراثيه اللي احنا بنعملها. فملخصا اقول لحضراتكم ان التحليل الوراثي ما هو الا الاختيار الصحيح للابقار، واللي هدفه مش بس انتاج لبن اكتر، لا كمان اعلى كم من اللبن وزياده ربحيه الابقار بشكل عام، تمام، من سواء انتاج لبن او انتاج عجول او ذات نفسه بمشاكل صحيه اقل، واللي هي في الاخر بتؤدي الى ان انا ما بشوفش اكتر المشاكل دي كلها. انا كده اتمنى ان انا اكون لخصت الكلام بتاع انتوني بصوره مبسطه لحضراتكم. هسيب المساحه لبريت بريستول عشان يقفل معانا واقول اخر محاضره ليا. Thanks a lot. This was my last slide, and I will leave the floor to Britt so that he can tell us his last presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hussein. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen again here. And the intention is to just finish out with a few slides here and thinking about what we need to consider when we think about a genomic testing program. So, we started with a lot of the why we should be considering genomics for our dairies and our operations. And that would be across all animal agriculture, right? So why should we consider a genomic testing program or a genetics program within our operations, regardless of species? And then also, Tony dived a little bit deeper into what we mean when we talk about genomic testing and what the benefits are. And the last slide that Dr. McNeil showed was around the profitability of what genomics can do. And I think that highlights, right? So we have the conceptual and why it's important, and then driving it down to the specifics. So what we're going to talk about here in the last few minutes is really what to consider when trying to optimize a genomic testing program. And really what I would encourage is for anyone on the line who's considering testing today, or maybe has already started, to make sure that these fundamental things are in place. They're absolutely critical to the success. Testing is an investment in the future of the dairy, and it's critical to ensure that there's going to be a positive return on that investment and that you're proceeding in the right direction. So with that, we've put together 6 keys, and these are keys to any genetics program that looks at genomics as well. These are absolutely critical to make sure that are included. First, start with a genetic audit to understand the herd's current genetic potential. We'll talk a little bit more of what's in an audit in the next slide, but what an audit does is it tells you where you're currently at as a herd. So as Dr. McNeil was talking about, the ability for different management styles to be able to get the most out of the genetics, the genetic audit will help to understand a lot of that, of where you're currently at, what management constraints or opportunities exist to be able to maximize the efforts putting into a genomic testing plan. And then also it provides a baseline to monitor progress over time. Second, ensure that you've developed a genetic strategy by creating specific goals and also defining performance metrics. When you're making an investment, it's important to ensure that you have those key performance indicators to ensure that investment will pay off. We've seen many herds that start testing who don't have these things in place, and ultimately this becomes a cost without benefit to the dairy or to any operation. So it's critical that you have that strategy in place, and we'll talk a little bit more about what components of that strategy should be included in the next slide. Third is it's critical to have an implementation plan. It may seem trivial or not important, but knowing how you're going to get the materials to start sampling to ensure that you understand who's going to be sampling and ensure they have the proper training to make sure sampling is done appropriately. To make sure you understand how and when you'll get the results back and what you're going to be doing with those results, how those results lead to achieving the strategy, those goals and performance metrics you've previously defined. So those three materials are absolutely critical before you start testing, and something, you know, if you don't know how to go about those, to certainly seek out some help in those areas. The fourth area is to ensure that you select an evaluation that aligns with your herd goals. So Tony had mentioned different indexes in the sheep industry in New Zealand, different indexes in the US with various different evaluations. There are several different evaluations that exist across the globe. So you want to ensure that you're choosing the evaluation that matches your herd goals. Do you care about showing your cows at competitions? If so, then you want to make sure they have the type traits, that their structural functions look good. If you don't care about show cows and you care about maximizing profitability, you know, choosing an evaluation that includes things like calf wellness, cow wellness, to ensure that the things that drive profitability are included in that index and that evaluation. If you care mostly about production, you know, and just making fluid milk or making milk for cheese or those sorts of things, there's evaluations for that. So really identifying what are your herd goals and what evaluation best aligns with those herd goals. Number 5 here, implement the plans and regularly monitor progress. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide as well, but it's important that not only do we implement testing plans, but we also monitor to make sure that they're working over time. Again, if we don't do that, they become a cost and not an asset, an investment. They just become a cost with no benefit. So these are the things to really set up a good genomics program. The last one here is completing that annual genetic audit. So essentially going back each year and making sure that you're making progress against the base to achieve your goals and ensuring that you're meeting your performance metrics. So to give a little bit more context of what is included in these 3 different areas. So on the previous page, we had things like implementation, which are the implementation of these strategies, of course, but also making sure that I go a little bit deeper into what the genetic audit, genetic strategy, and monitoring progress looks like. And that's because these are really fundamental things of having a genomic testing program that will work for your dairy. Without these, we probably wouldn't recommend testing. We really want to get these pieces in place. So the genetic audit is the first box here, and it looks at a comprehensive assessment of your dairy's operations herd management records to be able to identify opportunities in genetic improvement and profit. So almost every dairy, the best dairies in the world, still are finding areas of opportunity. Included in the herd audit is just an overall herd genetic overview, the response to genetic selection. So that's what Dr. McNeil was talking about earlier in the presentation about the management structures that can get the most out of their genetics. And then also a heifer replacement inventory. So when we think back to those financials of the herd, you know, we look at feed, we look at labor, we look at replacement costs being the top 3 costs. One of the things that we've found that a lot of dairies aren't paying enough attention or focusing enough on heifer replacement inventory. And so that's one of the things that is considered during a genetic audit. The second box here is genetic strategy, determining the best strategy to maximize profit for your specific herd. This includes things like your selling or culling strategy, strategic breeding strategies, the use of advanced reproductive technologies. And all of that can go together into a financial analysis, ensuring that the breedings that are taking place are going to result in the right outcomes in terms of number of female calves and the best way to achieve the inventories necessary for the herd. Additionally, are we mating the correct bulls to the right females? Are we mating the right females to have the future of our herd that we want and to achieve our goals and achieve those performance metrics. So that's kind of the genetic strategy. The one that's not on this slide, I'd mentioned that's really important is the implementation strategy. Who's going to be taking the tests? How are you going to get the materials? And how are you going to absorb those results back into the operation so that you can make appropriate management decisions that flow into the genetic strategy? The last box here is monitoring progress. Of course, this is what we want to do with everything on the operation. And oftentimes we lose track of monitoring the progress as we go to work every day. However, it's really important in terms of genetics. We can make a lot of progress fast with genomic testing, which is great, but it also means we have to make sure we're on the right path, that we're making progress in the right direction and maximizing our return on investment. To do so, we look at things such as the herd genomic overview. So very similar to that audit that we're looking at, but monitoring that over time. Again, looking at the response to genomic selection and monitoring that over time. And then also looking at compliance to the strategy. Are we doing what we said we were going to do? And if so, is it working? If we're not doing what we said we were going to do, is there a reason? Is there a barrier? Is there something that needs to be addressed? All of these things will help us to become more efficient and effective. They'll help us to unleash the genetic potential of the herd, as well as ensure that we're growing and evolving in the correct direction. So all really important things to think about before or as you get started with genomic testing, to make sure you have that foundation and you're not wasting the money, or you're not throwing away the investment and it just becomes a cost. Okay? So that's all I had to finish up the presentation. Wanted to just make sure that we were thinking about those things as we conclude today and you move forward. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Singh. And I think we're going to go into a review and then potentially questions and answers, I believe. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Singh.
Hussein, do you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Hussein, I'm hearing right now.
Yes, thanks.
You can see my screen now?
Yes.
تمام. طيب احنا علشان طبعا ننهي الكلام كله، هو كنا في الاخر بنحاول ان احنا نتكلم مع حضراتكم على الاساسيات النجاح للتحليل الوراثي. بعد ما احنا اتكلمنا في الاول عن انا ازاي بقدر اشوف الدنيا الاول ماشيه ازاي في انتاج الحليب في العالم، وانا محتاج ايه من التحليل او الانتخاب الوراثي اللي موجودين، واتنقلنا بعد كده ان احنا بنتكلم على انهي نوع بقره ان الواحد يقدر يحتاجه، وبعد كده اتكلمنا على انهي جينات اللي بقدر اختارها وازاي بقدر اختار الجينات دي كلها، وبقدر اعمل ايه من الانتخاب الوراثي وايه النتائج اللي انا بقدر اشوفها من الانتخاب الوراثي. احنا جينا النهارده للحته بتاعت طب انا ازاي اقدر اوصل لافضل مرحله او افضل نتيجه من الانتخابات الوراثيه. عشان اقدر اوصل لبرنامج وراثي ناجح وفعال، في عدد من النقاط احنا لازم نحطهم مع بعض او نشتغل فيهم مع بعض عشان اقدر اوصل لافضل نتيجه من برنامج الانتخاب الوراثي. اول حاجه احنا بنعملها مع حضرتك واحنا بنعمل الانتخاب الوراثي ان احنا بنعمل مراجعه للقطيع بالكامل. طبعا النقطه اللي انا كنت ذكرتها في الكلام اللي فات او المحاضره اللي فاتت على اول حاجه احنا بنحددها مع بعض هو هدف حضرتك من اصلا الانتخاب الوراثي او الجينيتك سيلكشن. حضرتك ليه بتعمل انتخاب وراثي؟ فلازم احدد الهدف بتاع حضرتك الاول، او حضرتك انت اللي بتكون محدده. بنحدد مع بعض الهدف من المزرعه وبنحط في الاخر الخطط اللي احنا عايزين نوصل لها، او بنحط في الاخر الهدف اللي انا عايز اوصل له قدام عينينا، علشان من خلال الخمس نقاط اللي موجودين حضرتك شايفهم دول انا اقدر اقول انهي انا وصلت للهدف بتاعي ولا لا. فبالتالي من بعد ما بنحدد الهدف بتاع المزرعه، اول حاجه بعمل مراجعه كامله للقطيع كله، بشوف الاخبار ايه في اخبار الجينات الوراثيه بتاعت القطيع كله، بشوف الوضع التنسيب جوه المزرعه اخباره ايه بالظبط، مين الابهات والامهات، اخبار السيمن سيلكشن ايه، او الحيوانات المنويه اللي حضرتك بتتم استيرادها من الخارج اخبارها ايه بالظبط، وانهي بقر بيديني اعلى انتاجيه، وايه المشاكل اللي حضرتك بتشوفها، والمشاكل دي كلها. بعد كده ابتدي انتقل على الاستراتيجيات الوراثيه ذات نفسها، واقدر ازاي احط مع حضرتك استراتيجيات احنا ايه اللي هنركز عليه، ايه اللي هيتم التركيز عليه علشان اقدر اوصل بيه لافضل برنامج وراثي ممكن، علشان يحقق لحضرتك في الاخر الهدف اللي حضرتك بتشوفه في الوقت القريب والبعيد كمان. بعد كده بعد ما بنحط الاستراتيجيات دي مع بعض بنبتدي نطبقها واحده واحده ونشوف النتائج بتاعتها، وبعديها ببتدي اعمل تحليل لحضرتك، اشوف مقارنه الاستراتيجيات اللي احنا حطيناها مع بعض بالاهداف، وهل انا بوصل للهدف بتاعي ولا ما بوصلش. كل سنه بيتم عمل مراجعه عامه للمزرعه عشان اقدر اوصل لافضل نتيجه من برنامج وراثي ناجح. طبعا زي ما حضراتكم شايفين في الصوره انا بتكلم على سواء البرودكشن او سواء الانتاج، سواء الانتاج التناسلي، سواء عموما زي الفانكشنال تايب اللي هو المشي والمشاكل القوام بتاعه الحيوان، المشاكل بتاعه العجول الصغيره، سواء مده المعيشه بتاعتها، نسبه اللبن بتاعتها، وكمان نسبه العجول اللي هي بتنتجها. لو جينا نقطه بشكل سريع وهي مراجعه القطيع بالكامل، زي ما كنا بنتكلم ان انا بشوف وضع التنسيب داخل جوه كل مزرعه فيهم، وبشوف النسبه اللي انا بقدر اشوف مين الابهات ومين الامهات، وابتدي اراجع السجلات مع حضرتك، وده كله من خلال البرامج اللي بيتم استخدامها جوه المزرعه علشان تقدر تساعد حضرتك على اداره المزرعه ذات نفسها. تاني حاجه بشوف مدى المطابقه للاختيار الوراثي اللي تم حضرتك عملته، وبقدر اقول ان زي ما احنا شايفين ادي اول صوره على الشمال خالص، هي ان انا بقول ان دي صوره انا بختارها عن طريق الرؤيه مع استخدام الانتخاب الوراثي. وصلت المرحله ان انا وصلت ل 70 تقريبا في المية من الهدف بتاعي، مع زياده استخدامات الانتخابات الوراثيه انا ممكن اوصل ل 100% من الانتاجيه، واعدي كمان الانتاجيه دي مع الحيوانات. وكمان بقيس مع حضرتك نسب العجلات اللي موجوده اللي هتم استبدال الابقار علشان تبقى هم دول اللي في المستقبل، هو ده القطيع بتاعي اللي انا باخد منه اعلى انتاجيه واحسن ولدات واحسن عجلات موجوده، علشان في الاخر اكبر المزرعه بتاعتي من الانتخاب الوراثي. تاني نقطة وهو موضوع الاستراتيجيات علشان التقييم الوراثي، فأنا ببتدي أشوف التحليل المالي للمزرعة وأخبار الربحية بتاعت المزرعة إيه بالظبط مع حضرتك، وإيه أكتر المدخلات اللي بيتم إدخالها للمزرعة، طب ونسبة الدخل ونسبة الإنفاق أو المنفقات اللي بتخرج من المزرعة أخبارها إيه، وهي متجهة ناحية إيه علشان نبتدي نعالجه مع بعض. طبعا بنحسب كل المحاسبات التناسلية مع بعض وخطط التلقيح الاصطناعي عشان نقدر نختار مع بعض انهي بقره نقدر نحطها في التلقيح الصناعي وانهي بقر اقدر اشتغل عليه بالظبط. بعد كده بنعمل مع بعض دايما تحليل وراثي ونفضل متابعه للتحليل الوراثي اللي احنا عملناه، فنقدر احدد مع حضرتك التحليل ده هل وصلني للهدف اللي احنا حطيناه في اول ما قعدنا اول مره، هل قدرنا نوصل على ارض الواقع فعلا النتائج كويسه، هل حضرتك بقيت في ارتباط ما بين التحليل وما بين النتيجه بتاعه اللي حضرتك شفتها على ارض الواقع، علشان في الاخر اقدر اوصل ان انا افضل دايما في تحليل وراثي علشان اوصل لافضل انتاجيه في خلال مزرعتي. فدي دايما حتى جمله احنا بنقولها wellness is a profitable choice، ففي الاخر الصحه هي اختيار مربح جدا لحضرتك واختيار مربح للمزرعه. عشان كده احنا دايما بنرجع على موضوع الانتخاب الوراثي عشان نقدر نوصل لافضل بقره موجوده او افضل قطيع موجود باعلى انتاجيه باقل مشاكل. انا بشكر حضراتكم جدا، وانا كده انهيت المحاضره بتاعتي، وشكرا جدا لحضراتكم. دكتور حسين.
Thanks a lot, my friend. Thanks a lot, Hussein. Thanks a lot for all our speakers for today workshop. So I believe now this is a time for the question and answers, and I have seen some questions in the chat box or the question and answer box. The question for the genetics team, roughly how much does it cost the genomic testing per one cow or one heifer? Anthony, Brett?
Yeah, so I can answer that one.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so the cost of testing will vary depending on the test that you're looking for. Certainly, following this call, if you want to get in touch, we can certainly identify the right solution for your operation. In general, the tests run somewhere between $30 and $50 depending on what information you're receiving and those sorts of things. In general, we look to then seek a 2-to-1 to 3-to-1 minimum return on investment for that cost. So that strategy will then help to identify what price you kind of should be paying for what you're looking to achieve.
Okay, very clear. Hussein, do you want to translate or something?
طبعا يا دكتور هو السؤال كان على السعر تقريبا التست بتاع كل بقره كان كام بالظبط. ده كان السؤال. الاجابه هو بيقول طبعا السؤال التست او التحليل او الانتخاب الوراثي بيفرق على حسب حضرتك محتاج ايه بالظبط من التحليل الوراثي ده. حضرتك بتدور على ايه بالظبط. هو التحليل بيقع الرينج بتاعه ما بين 30 ل $50 للتحليل الواحد او للعجله الواحده بمعنى اصح. ولكن كله في الاول وفي الاخر بيفرق حضرتك محتاج ايه من التحليل وحضرتك محتاج تحلل ايه بالظبط. لان طبعا مش كل التحاليل بتتعمل، يعني ال $30 دي ليها عدد تحاليل معينه وال $50 ليها عدد تحاليل معينه. فده كان الرد بصوره مبسطه على الاجابه بتاعت بريت.
Okay, so I believe there is another question here on the chat box. Do you test all cows or heifers, or you can get only representative samples from the herd?
I'll pick up that one. So it depends on the goals, right? There's some farms what they're looking to do is more long-term, and so we typically start with the heifers. There are other farms that have more resources, or they have a different or more immediate end product, or not end product, end objective. They're trying to get somewhere faster, and so that's when it makes sense to test some cows. But generally speaking, you'll test all animals of a given cohort and then use that information to rank the animals and take decisions. It's hard to say with broad strokes because, as Brett indicated, it's much more focused on getting you the large return on your investment, and everybody's definition of return is slightly different. So we need to understand what you're trying to do and what your objectives are. Because if you're trying to get your crew from the parlor to the heifer grower that's 5 kilometers away, well, we can do that with a bicycle, but that's not necessarily what you want, right? You get what you pay for, and understanding the goals and the objectives is really key in making sure we can give you the best strategy possible.
Okay, very clear. Tony, Hussein, do you want to translate, right?
يعني هو بيتكلم ببساطه ان دلوقتي لو حضرتك السؤال كان هل انا لازم اعمل تحليل لكل العجلات اللي موجوده في المزرعه، ولا بيتم انتخاب عدد معين من العجلات وهم دول اللي انا ببني عليهم القرار بتاعي. هو برضو نفس الاجابه بتاعت اول سؤال، هو بيتم على حسب اللي حضرتك محتاجه ايه بالظبط من المزرعه. بيتم طبعا دي هتنفع ودي هتنفع، ولكن لو حضرتك عايز تنهض بالمزرعه من مرحله ان حضرتك عندك انتاجات قليله او شغل ده لمرحله اعلى، فهو بيرجح ان حضرتك طبعا تنتج او حضرتك تعمل اكتر كم من التحاليل الوراثيه للعجلات علشان اقدر اختار ايه بالظبط اللي هيقدر يفيدني من الاهداف بتاعتي. في الاول وفي الاخر القرار بيرجع لحضرتك انت، مش بيرجع ليهم هم. هو الموضوع بيتم عن طريق ان احنا بنحدد الهدف اللي حضرتك محتاجه اولا، وبعد كده الاستراتيجيه اللي احنا بنقدمها لحضرتك والقرار اللي حضرتك هتاخده في الاخر. زي ما وضحت في المحاضره، اهم ما ان حضرتك تعمل التحليل الوراثي ان حضرتك تاخد قرار من بعد التحليل الوراثي علشان تشوف النتيجه من الانفستمنت او الاستثمار اللي حضرتك عملته من الانتخاب الوراثي.
Okay, very clear. I see some people already raising their hands. So if you please just write down your question on the chat box or in the question and answer session in order to address your questions. There is one more question here. What are the types of samples that we can collect for genomic testing?
I'll take that one. So for the Gulf region, we recommend either hair or TSUs, or tissue sampling units, would be our preferred sampling types. In reality, the best solution is the TSU, the tissue sampling unit. It's a little bit more expensive, admittedly, that's a higher cost, but the time requirement to collect samples using TSUs, it's much less than it is with hair. So there's a trade-off. The sampling with the hair, it's cheaper, but you incur more time. Your crew will incur more time collecting those samples, and they're more likely to fail at the lab. Whereas the TSUs, if you can put an ear tag in, you can use a TSU. It is very simple, and I won't say it's perfect, but it is by far the best solution that we have today.
Okay, perfect. حسين؟
هو السؤال كان ايه التحليل بالظبط، انا باخد ايه نوعيه العينه اللي بيتم اتخاذها لعمل تحليل الانتخاب الوراثي. وهو رد ان احنا عندنا حلين، عندنا حاجتين ممكن اقدر احللهم. اول حاجه الشعر، او حاجه اسمها التيشو سامبلينج يونت، او اللي هي قطعه من اللي هنقولها اللي هي قطعه من الجلد، او قطعه من الحيوان. هي عباره عن قطعه من الودن ذات نفسها بتتم قطعها زي بالظبط ما بركب الرقم في ودن البقره او ودن الحيوان عندي. هو بيفرق لحضراتكم ما بين الاثنين. فالشعر طبعا بالنسبه له هو النتيجه بتاعته ضعيفه شويه، تمام. طبعا هو ممكن يكون اسرع وابطا كمان في التجميع بتاعه من العينه بتاعه الودن ذات نفسها. كمان النسب النجاح بتاعتها وفي التحاليل بتاعتها اقل بكتير. يعني هم اكتشفوا ان التيشو سامبلينج يونت، او النقطه او القطعه من الودن اللي بتتاخد زي الرقم بالظبط، دي نسب نجاحها اعلى والدقه بتاعتها اعلى بكتير من الشعر. وكمان يعني الشعر كان بيتكلم على السعر مقارنه الاثنين ببعض، وبيقول لك طبعا الشعر ممكن يكون ارخص شويه لكن دقته اقل، فبالتالي احنا دايما بنرجح ان حضرتك تاخد التيشو سامبلينج يونت او القطعه من الودن للتحليل بتاعتها.
Okay. One more question here. The heritability of milk production traits is medium. So do you think the genetic improvement will give us good results with the herd environmental conditions in Gulf?
Yeah, so the heritability of milk is, we consider it to be moderate or medium. It's depending on the evaluation, it's 20% to 30%. The simple answer is yes. Improving GPTAs for milk will give you more milk. What the heritability is, it really communicates two things: how easy it is to change the direction of the herd. So if you're at a low level of milk production from a genetic standpoint, with a higher heritability, you can make progress a lot faster. So in terms of ease of making progress, heritability communicates that. It also communicates how easy or hard it is for the environment to suppress genetic differences. So the higher the heritability, like milk or stature is at 50% heritability. With those types of heritability, management has a relatively difficult time suppressing genetic merit. Right? It's easier to see differences with a higher genetic merit, higher heritability. Such as fertility, wellness traits, longevity. It's much easier for management. They'll kind of are positioning or offering genomic testing We have a high level of confidence that genomics is going to work for you, and how much value it brings to your farm is a direct reflection of what type of environment we can help you create to get the most from your cows.
Hussein, please.
طبعا دلوقتي هو كان السؤال بيسأل حضرتك ان هو كان في حد بيسأل من منطقة الخليج، هل لو انا النهارده عملت الجينيتك تيستنج او عملت الانتخاب الوراثي للبقر عندي، حتى لو انا متخيل ان انا عندي جينات وسطيه، هل هقدر اخد جود ريزلت يعني سبيشال، او هقدر اخد نتيجه ممتازه، خصوصا ان انا قاعد في جو مناخي صعب جدا؟ فهو بيتكلم ان طبعا حضرتك تقدر تاخد نتيجه ممتازه من الانتخاب الوراثي، لان احنا شفنا ان هم كانوا في وقت من الخليج ان هم بيرجحوا بيقول لك ان المانجمنت او الاداره بتاعه المزرعه هي اللي تقدر تفرق لي في جوده المزرعه او الجوده دي كلها. لكن اكتشفوا او لما اشتغلوا، طبعا هم اوريدي اشتغلوا في مناطق في الجلف او الخليج، لقوا ان طبعا حتى الكفاءه ان هم يقدروا يعملوا التحليل الوراثي جايب نتيجه اعلى بكتير، وقدرت تفرق فعلا في المزارع في نسب الانتاج ونسب الاستحمال حتى بتاع المزارع بتاع الحيوانات من مزرعه لمزرعه.
I believe we already discussed the types of the samples, but now we are talking about the age. There is one question here about what is the best age where we can collect the sample and do the genetic testing in heifers.
So that varies. It depends on the operations protocol. So I have farms that I consult on their sampling at birth, and they're submitting the samples once a week, and then they're taking decisions at weaning. There are other farms that are sampling at weaning, and then they're taking decisions on their stock at 8 months of age. So in general, we see the largest return on one's investment when you take decisions at weaning, so sampling in the first week of life, and then taking decisions at roughly 60 days of age. That has the largest ROI when it comes to creating a strategy. But it's flexible. It's very much, you tell us what your strengths are, and we'll help you create the solution that delivers the largest return on your investment.
Yes, yes. Hussein, I believe this is a clear question, or do you want to translate as well? Yeah?
As you like, Dr. Hussein.
Okay, go ahead.
يعني لا، هو بس هو الموضوع ببساطه، يعني هو بيسال انا من امتى اقدر ابدا وكده، فهو بيقول لحضرتك برضو تاني الجمله اللي احنا قلناها، ان احنا محتاجين الاول ان احنا نحدد الهدف بتاع المزرعه عشان اقدر احلل فيها، وفي الاخر احنا نقدر نساعد حضرتك في اي عمر ان كان. طبعا احنا دايما بنفضل العجلات الصغيره اللي هي لسه مولوده، لكن انت حضرتك في الاول حدد بس الهدف بتاع المزرعه، واحنا هنقدر نساعد حضرتك في الانتخاب الوراثي وتحسين من المزرعه وتحسين من الصفات الوراثيه اللي موجوده.
Okay, I believe there is one question also here regarding genetic improvement of milk production. Does this affect the other traits? يعني for example, if we genetically select the cows or the heifer based on the milk production, this would affect the other traits?
Yeah, so that's what we did from, let's see, basically the 1950s through the late 90s. We're selecting almost exclusively for more milk production. And for those of you that, or for those of us, sorry, that remember the 80s and 90s and the quality of the cows and the difficulties that we had with those cows, that's an experience we don't want to repeat. Low fertility, cows leaving the herd very, very early. And it's almost a problem that genomics was created to solve, right? With genomic information, we get a much better assessment of the quality of the animal. And then with a multi-trait selection strategy, using a selection index like Dairy Wellness Profit, you can get more milk while getting more fertility and wealth and longevity, wellness. It just depends on what your goals are. We can create 80,000 pound cows if we wanted to. But we know that if we put that much pressure on milk, we're going to have a negative impact on other things, which is why creating these selection indexes is so difficult, because you have to adjust for the relationships. And when we do it at Zoetis, it's typically a 3-month exercise to go from beginning from scratch or from nothing to a functional index that does everything we want it to do. It takes about 3 months. It takes a lot of information. So typically our solution or recommendation to get started is to identify the selection index that most closely aligns to your goals, and then let's tweak or adjust your strategy so that you can achieve what you want to achieve.
Okay, Hussein, please.
طيب هو كان السؤال لو انا النهارده اخترت او عملت انتخاب وراثي للانتاج اللبن، تمام، هل ده هيأثر على المشاكل الثانيه او هيبتدي يظهر لي مشاكل ثانيه لو فضلت مركز على الانتخاب الوراثي للبن فقط؟ الرد كان يعني هو كان زمان كان البقر بيتم اختياره طبعا لاختيار اللبن، وبالتالي كان في الثمانينات والتسعينات لحد ما لقوا ان البقر طبعا بيحصل له مشاكل كتير جدا سواء تناسليه او البقر ذات نفسه بيسيب المزرعه بدري لان بيحصل منه مشاكل مرضيه كتير. فهم علشان كده طلعوا بالديري ويلنس بروفيت او عدد الصفات المتحده مع بعض او المتناغمه مع بعض كلها علشان يقدروا يوصلوا ان هو يدي لحضرتك اعلى نتيجه من الانتخاب الوراثي. فبالتالي هو يقدر يعني بيقول لك انت بالانتخاب الوراثي انت ممكن توصل ان بقره تجيب لحضرتك فوق ال 80 كيلو لبن او 80 لتر حليب في اليوم الواحد، لكن هم مش عايزين يوصلوا المرحله دي لان طبعا لقوا ان الكلام ده فعلا قد ياثر، لكن هم بيوصلوا حضرتك انك تاخد بقره اعلى انتاج حليب منها، زائد اعلى نسبه اخصاب موجوده، زائد تقدر ان هي تكون موجوده في المزرعه بصوره اطول تدي لحضرتك مواسم اكتر من اللبن، واعلى عدد من الولدات كمان مع اقل الامراض اللي موجوده. هم عملوا في الاخر الانتخاب الوراثي علشان يجمع الصفات القريبه كلها من بعض، وفي الاخر ما فيش صفه تاثر على صفه ثانيه.
شكرا. I believe also there is one question here. There are many questions, so I'm trying to figure each one or to address each one separately. Just give me a moment, please.
I can see a small question.
Yes, please.
If people, I guess they're asking is Dr. Ahmed Aisawi. I guess he's asking about the meat production. Yes. Is the meat production? Can we increase the or make genetic selection to meat production, or is it too expensive to do that?
I think I'll let Brett handle that one because that's we can do it. It's just it's a little bit of a chimeric answer. So Brett, why don't you take a crack at it?
Yeah, no problem. So I think it depends a bit on if we're talking about sow or lambs. The answer is yes. We certainly can select for and make progress quickly in terms of meat production, and we've seen that, and we've seen animals get larger, both in sheep and beef operations. You know, we think about pork, poultry as well. We've seen significant gains in those areas using genomics. In terms of using a dairy animal to generate beef and the quality of meat, certainly the answer is yes, we can. We also can look at how we implement the right strategies on the farm. If the goal is to create high quality beef, you know, we may be looking at using beef semen on our low merit females in the dairy. And what that does then is it allows us to genetically cull the animal from the herd, but she still produces a calf and she's still in the milking strain, right? So there's various different strategies that can be used based on the goals of the operation. And the quick answer is yes, we can make quick gains in terms of meat production, specifically around yield and also quality. So you're thinking about beef, we can make fairly good gains in terms of meat quality as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Brett. Dr. Hussein, you want to say something?
No, please go ahead.
هو كان الرد على السؤال، هل الاسهل تحسين صفه اللحم؟ كان بيسال الدكتور احمد، كان بيسال على صفه اللحم اللي موجوده، هل نقدر نحسنها وراثيا في المزارع؟ الاجابه كانت طبعا نقدر نعمل كده، لكن دايما اللي كان بيسالوهم على صفه اللحم دي دايما في مش البقر الحلاب، هم كانوا دايما بيسالوهم على بقر التسمين او البقر اللي يتم انتاجه او يتم تخصيصه لانتاج اللحم ذات نفسه. فهم يعني يقدر يقول لحضرتك يقدر يعمل كده، يقدر يحاول حتى بقره من بقره حلاب ان هي تقدر تنتج عجول تسمين، وبنختار كمان نوعيه السيمن نقدر نرجعه لحضرتك، وكمان نقدر نرجح انهي بقر بالظبط اللي يتم تخصيبه وتحويله من بقر حلاب الى بقر انتاج عجول تسمين بافضل نتيجه لحم ممكنه او افضل لحم موجوده حضرتك تقدر تاخدها من الانتخاب الوراثي.
Thanks a lot. I believe time is running is very fast. Despite I have many questions here, but I just see some questions are very quite similar. What is the name of the testing device that used to analyze the samples, and what is the methods? So we can skip the name of the testing device, because I know that there are several companies can support in this regard. However, Zoetis is leading company in the genomic testing, but at least the methods. So Anthony.
Yeah, so the industry standard for genomic testing, and it doesn't matter if it's cattle, pork, or pigs, chickens, horses, humans. It's a company by the name of Illumina. So Illumina is based in the United States, in San Diego, California, and they have a proprietary technology, and they've developed it in such a way that those SNP chips that we talked about early in my talk, that's the platform by which samples are tested. And so what that is you define which pieces of DNA you're interested in assaying, and they'll put those on the chip. So if it's essentially a known marker list or known list of DNA fragments, and they put it on the chip. And so we extract the DNA, put the DNA on it's really a microscope slide. And then with a few more really cool pieces of technology, we transform that from biological information into digital information. And then once it's digitized, we can use it in a genetic evaluation. So the simple answer is we use the Illumina platform. It's the industry standard, and it provides us with the highest throughput at the lowest cost.
Yeah. Very good. Hussein, do you want to translate this part?
هو السؤال كان انتوا حضراتكم، يعني كان السؤال بيقول احنا بنحلل ايه بالظبط، او بيتم التحليل ازاي للجينات الوراثيه او الانتخاب الوراثي. فهو بيجاوب بيقول ان احنا بنستخدم زي طريقه كده ضوئيه، يعني بطريقه معينه بيتم عملها في معمل في امريكا. ان حضرتك ان احنا طبعا بنحدد نوعيه او الهدف بتاع حضرتك فيه من المزرعه، تمام، وبنحدد الجين المسؤول عن المنطقه دي، وهم اوريدي محددين كل الجينات بتاعه البقر اللي هو الهولشتاين كله، تمام، وعاملين له ترتيب ذات نفسه. فهم لو حضرتك قلت انا عايز فور اكزامبل ازود نسب الحليب واقلل مثلا نسب المشاكل التهابات الرحم او التهابات الضلع، فهو بيقدر ان هو يحدد الجينات دي كلها من العينات اللي حضرتك بتديها له، بيحطها على اللي هو الشريط الضوئي ده، ويحدد الجينات دي كلها ويعرف نسبتها عند حضرتك قد ايه، وبالتالي يرجع لحضرتك بالنتيجه ويقول لحضرتك انت محتاج تعمل ايه بالظبط بالانتخاب الوراثي.
Okay, very clear. So I'd like to thank you all for the active participation, for the interaction. I mean the attendees. Thank you so much for our speakers today, Anthony, Brett, and behind the scene, our colleague Brian. By that, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Ali, just to make the closing. Especially Dr. Ali, we have seen also some questions related to the presentations, to the link for the recording if possible. So I believe this should be managed by the Ministry of the Environment, Water and Agriculture in Saudi Arabia, because thanks a lot for them for organizing this great seminar and also giving us this opportunity. It's really a pleasure, Dr. Ali. So the floor is yours.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
أول شيء أحب أشكركم على هذه الفعالية القيمة. حقيقة في معلومات كثيرة حقيقة تعلمتها في هذه الفعالية في ورشة العمل. شكرا لك دكتور حسين، وأيضا دكتور حسين أيضا على الشيخ، وايضا thank you بريت and براين and أنتوني، وايضا الشكر موصول للدكتور سليمان محمد. بخصوص الفعالية هذه احنا نسجل كل الفعاليات اللي نحضرها، وراح ترفع على موقع الارشاد البيطري ووزارة البيئة والمياه والزراعة، وممكن ان شاء الله باذن الله حتكون مرجع لاي احد يبغى يستفيد من هذه الفعالية، لأنه صراحة حجم المعلومات اللي كان فيها ثري جدا، وأعتقد أنها حتكون إضافة قيمة للمكتبة العربية في مجال اللي هو الانتخاب الوراثي لقطاع الماشية، وخاصة أن المعلومات اللي عرضت فعلا قيمة واستفدت منها كثير. طبعا أحب أشكركم دكتور حسين مرة أخرى على حسن إدارة هذه الفعالية، وبإذن الله حنلتقي إن شاء الله بفعاليات أكثر وأكثر في المستقبل. والشكر موصول لشركة زويتس على استضافة هذه الفعالية، التنسيق مع السادة المحاضرين، وكل الشكر والتقدير. أنا ما أدري في أسئلة ثانية غير اللي هو سؤال اللي هو تسجيل الحلقة.
لا اعتقد دكتور علي تقريبا احنا حاولنا بقدر الامكان نغطي معظم الاسئله. كان في بعض الاستفسارات متشابهه او الاسئله متشابهه، فكنا بنحاول نجمعها مع بعضها لكن اتخيل لا اعتقد كان هو السؤال الكومن ازاي نحصل على المحاضرات وازاي نحصل على التسجيل.
اوكي هذا اعتقد نغطيناها في موضوع المحاضرات. ان شاء الله راح ترفع على موقع الارشاد البيطري تكون مرجع ان شاء الله. كرر شكري وتقديري لكم دكتور حسين على حسن إدارة هذه الفعالية، ونتمنى دائما نلتقي دائما على خير
بإذن الله. والشكر موصول لحضراتكم في وزارة الزراعة، سعداء جدا جدا بالتواصل مع حضراتكم، لكم مننا جزيل الشكر والعرفان
إن شاء الله بإذن الله. وكل الشكر أيضا لكل الحضور على تفاعلهم في هذه الفعالية والأسئلة القيمة أيضا اللي طرحوها. إذا كان هناك أي استفسارات متعلقة أيضا في موضوع هذه ورشة العمل، ممكنها يتم عن طريق الرد على اللي هو إعلان المحاضرة أو ورشة العمل في موقع تويتر الارشاد البيطري، ارشاد فت SA في موقع تويتر. ممكن إن شاء الله إذا فيه أسئلة مستقبلية وراح نحولها للزملاء ويجاوبون عليها، وراح تلقون إجابة على موقع تويتر حساب الارشاد البيطري بتويتر. كل الشكر والتقدير لكم جميعا، اعذروني على عدم مشاركة الكاميرا لأنه عندي مشاكل في الاتصال، ولكن إن شاء الله بإذن الله في فعاليات أكثر مستقبلا إن شاء الله. كل الشكر والتقدير، وتصبحون على خير.
وحضرتك من ألف خير. شكرا جدا لحضرتك.
شكرا جزيلا لك.
مع السلامة.